Here we are, the true beginning, the first edition core rulebook that began it all, Vampire the Masquerade. Available as a softcover book and released by White Wolf on July 4th, 1991, it is an interesting read from a historic perspective, but not without its issues. There's a strong sense of revision happening throughout that didn't quite reach all sections, causing a number of contradictions. Things don't always mesh with how the setting is described, the mix-up of character names, and so on. I have noted examples of this where applicable. A good quality PDF is available through DriveThruRPG for this title, and though most old White Wolf books are available via their print-on-demand program, this is not one of them. The only copies available physically are old printings of the book, and finding one in good quality can be tricky. Many of the available copies are well used, even if well loved. My copy that I acquired through eBay bears a history all its own, covered as it is in nebulous ink and grease stains and other marks from handling and games over more than 30 years of existence. The book acted as the first step for many into what would ultimately be known as the World of Darkness. The book bears the now iconic single rose on green marble of its cover alongside the title, the back providing further flavor. A storytelling game of personal horror, it informs us. Here we are greeted with a quote. "No one holds command over me, no man, no god, no prince. What is a claim of age for ones who are immortal? What is a claim of power for ones who defy death? Call your damnable hunt. We shall see who I drag screaming to hell with me." This is attributed to Gunther Dorn from Das Ungeheuer darin, which can be translated as the monster inside, or, as was likely intended, transliterated to the beast within, a primary theme of Vampire. This appears to be a made-up quote, so it could be attributed to an in-world character or work, though I am not aware of any reference to it otherwise. Opening to the title page, we're greeted with a stark drawing of a cityscape at night, the sky overcast and lightning striking amidst the buildings. Following this are the credits. Credited with the writing of the book, we have the creator, Mark Ryan-Hagan, joined by Graham Davis, Tom Dowd, Lisa Stevens, and Stuart Wieck. Credited with the art in the book, we have Tim Bradstreet, Chris McDonough, Ed McKeag, Ron Spencer, Richard Thomas, and Josh Timbrook. This first book, and the game as a whole, is dedicated to the poet, playwright, and former president of Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic, Václav Havel. This is followed by a quote from a speech he gave to the U.S. Congress. "We are still under the sway of the destructive and vain belief that man is the pinnacle of creation and not just a part of it, and that, therefore, everything is permitted. We are incapable of understanding that the only genuine backbone of our actions, if they are to be moral, is responsibility. Responsibility to something higher than my family, my country, my firm, my success. Responsibility to the order of being, where all our actions are indelibly recorded and where, and only where, they will be properly judged." With that, we enter the world of darkness, whereupon we are greeted by our first of many iconic images from Tim Bradstreet, this one of a Nosferatu, accompanied by a pronunciation guide, something that would intentionally be left out of future books. Our introduction follows. A letter dated January 3rd to W.H. from your most devoted servant, and signed Semper Severus V.T. Context clues throughout the letter point to this being none other than a letter from Lad Tepes, aka Dracula, to Wilhelmina Harker, the wife of Jonathan Harker, the main character of Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. In the letter, he offers condolences for the death of her husband and apologizes to her, seeking atonement for his past actions, claiming time and nature both struggle to extinguish his humanity, and that he must guard his soul as well as any priest, as any lapse in vigilance lets in the beast. As part of this atonement, he sends along with the letter a document which he claims giving to her makes him a traitor to his own kind. The phrase implies that the section which follows is Dracula laying the secrets of vampires bare to her in supplication. Leading directly off of Dracula's letter, he speaks in this document of the origins of his kind, and the Book of Nod said to collect such stories, though no one he knows has ever seen a complete copy, and the scraps that exist come in a multitude of languages, and they often contradict each other, some appearing to be intentionally falsified. But among them all is a common thread. The biblical Cain, son of Adam and Eve, the first murderer, and referred to by some as the third man, was also the first vampire. Cast out of mortal society for killing his brother and cursed with eternal life and a hunger for blood, he wandered the wilderness for time untold until his name was forgotten. Eventually, he re-emerged and became the leader of a city known to Kindred as the First City, sometimes called Enoch, Uniac, or Enkiel. It is here that he created 3 progeny known as the Second Generation. They themselves begat their own progeny, though the number is unclear and depending on the account read numbered 9, 27, 100, or none at all. Cain forbade further creation, realizing perhaps what he had unleashed upon the world. The city was at peace until a great flood came upon the world and destroyed it. Cain believed this was a divine punishment sent to him for returning to the world of man and departed once more. He once again forbade his progeny from creating more of their kind and left them. They did not heed his decree. From this point, Cain faded from the world and was never seen again, though even into modern nights, some calling themselves Cain will periodically appear somewhere in the world. At times, they are revealed to be an imposter, but on other occasions, the individual vanishes as quickly as they appeared. Many believe he still lives, though others, Dracula included, believe these events are just some game of the elders. Either way, it is said Cain is steeped in the sorrow of what he had unleashed upon mankind. The second and third generations continued to produce progeny and ruled together for a time, though eventually the younger generations rose up and slew their sires, drinking their blood. Another great city was built, said to be ruled by the fourth generation, known now only as the Second City. Some believed it had been Babylon, while others suspect what is left of it lies beneath the sands of Egypt. This rule, too, was not without trouble. Some of the third generation remained, and it is believed that they were secretly behind the uprising to destroy the second generation. They decreed that only they would be allowed to create more of their kind, and any who disobeyed would be hunted and killed along with their progeny. While the fourth generation lived in the open, the remains of the third, known today as the Antediluvians, lived in secret and kept their havens hidden, ruling over the fourth this way for 2 millennia while the fourth ruled the city. Over time, the culture of the city grew decadent and the city began to die. The mortals rose up against their kindred rulers and slew any they could find. With the fall of the second city, its rulers were scattered to the far corners of the earth and there were too many for the third to control any longer. As they settled around the world, freed from the rule of their sires, the fourth generation begat the fifth generation. The account goes on to speak of a time, now long ago, when empires rose and were locked in battle. Persians, Greeks, Tartars, and more, all at the behest of the fifth, mirroring what had come before. Or perhaps these things happened at the behest of the third, who had already begun to play their great game. Whatever the truth, it is believed none yet live that could speak the truth of it. Dracula himself claims to have only ever met one of the fifth generation, and did not know it at the time. Near the end of this period, it is believed the antediluvians rose and destroyed nearly all of their kind, leaving but a single progeny each, their lust for blood so strong they needed the blood of all that came after them. Legend states that this was the close of the second cycle. The prophecies that make up these myths state that each cycle lasts 2,300 years, and the current third cycle will soon come to a close. The antediluvians sleep now, but they will rise again to nearly purge the world of their kind. This event is known as Gehenna, and some prepare for it fervently. Dracula, who refers to himself as a man of science, has his doubts. He goes on to state that those of the fifth generation and lower exist in nigh complete seclusion, being powerful and cunning and able to cover their tracks well. He names them Inkanu, and says they do this out of fear of one another. The sixth generation, of which Dracula is one, and lower are the bulk of the kindred in the world. He speaks of rumors of a 13th and even 14th generation, but dismisses them out of hand, speaking of the frailty such beings would have, and noting that the blood thins as it is passed from one generation to the next. Dracula goes on to talk of a time, beginning in 1435, that saw the destruction of a multitude of kindred, not at the hands of their progenitors, but at the hands of mortal kind, the Inquisition. Among the burning of many harmless old women, the Inquisition hit its true aim and destroyed many a genuine witch, warlock, and monster. This event brought a true fear of extinction to the kindred, and many who survived those times bear mental scars and are reluctant to enter the mortal world any longer. From this fear came the embrace of secrecy, leading to the rise of the Camarilla, and the calling of a great meeting to establish rules to govern their kind, which was held in 1486. Of the laws determined at this time, Dracula claims only one survived to modern nights, the first and most important of them, the Masqeruade, something he willingly violates to put these words to paper. The goal was to convince the mortal world that all of vampire kind had been destroyed or, better yet, had never existed at all. All kindred must hide their nature around mortals, and to betray this secrecy would see them outcast and hunted down as a danger to all. Second to this was the need to turn humanity away from their superstitious leanings, and through this saw a helping hand directing them towards scientific pursuits and other academic leanings, helping to enlighten mortals as vampires themselves retreated to the shadows. Science had bred reason, and reason denied the existence of monsters. Dracula is quick to point out that though the Kindred guided mankind away from the superstitious, they were not puppets, and the hand of the Kindred was not in all of mankind's achievements or failings. Despite this, the mortal eye ever turns back to the supernatural and the mystic, and it has become harder to turn them away as time goes on. The Camarilla fights a war to do so, and the evidence is all around for those who know where to look. Dracula notes that much like in mortal society, the Kindred are seeing a generational gap between older Kindred and those made in the latter half of the current century who are often of a higher generation. Calling themselves anarchs, he says they seek to spurn the rule of princes and spurn the law of the Masqeruade, desiring freedom above all else and performing acts that would force knowledge of the Kindred world into the sight of the mortals. Not taking kindly to these outbursts, many older Kindred find themselves in a near-constant state of war with these younger Kindred, with neither group willing nor able to trust the other. Dracula then waxes poetic about mortal views of vampires and their contradictory nature as written, being seen as both villain and hero, the incarnation of dark desires and the nobility of fairy tales, and so on. He muses that writers have often unwittingly stumbled across profound truths about his kind before suddenly taking them in a completely wrong direction. In particular, he mentions the French monk, Antoine Augustin Calmet, who wrote a treatise in the mid-1700s covering many areas of occultism, including vampires. Dracula notes that Calmet describes the way to kill a vampire being a stake through the heart, removal of the head, and burning of the remains, wryly pointing out that such a method, while effective, also kills mortals just as easily. He then describes the advent of motion pictures filtering this method down to merely staking, pointing out that this does not, in fact, work, and serves only to immobilize. He says that though burning or sunlight are effective, weapons of metal should have no faith placed in them. They can injure, but such wounds heal quickly for his kind. One thing the motion pictures got correct, he says, is sunlight. Only the oldest and strongest can withstand it even for a short length of time. Holy instruments, however, are generally useless. The one time he witnessed such things having an effect, he described that the wielder almost glowed with faith in the divinity, and concluded that in such an instance it was the person and not the instrument that made the difference, able to channel their true faith through the object. In addition, other folklore tied to vampire weaknesses holds no power, be it garlic, aconite, or running water, but is quick to note that there are rumors of a clan who bears such weakness to water and believes this is how many such rumors started over the ages. Such weaknesses have arisen in several bloodlines, which get passed down from sire to their childer. Moving on, Dracula speaks of the powers a vampire may be known for and the many wondrous things he has seen in his centuries, touching first on shapeshifting into various animal forms. Though this is possible, it is not common, and describes it as a power shown only by the rare breed known as Clan Gangrel, and from the incredibly old and most powerful of Kindred. Other powers that mortals might deem supernatural stem from a vampire's nature as a predator, as well as their ability to inspire fear, stillness, obedience, and other feelings, noting his own ability to dominate the will of others. He believes much of the confusion surrounding a vampire's abilities and weaknesses may be due to mistaken identity, noting that there exists a creature that bridges a gap between mortals and vampires, something the Kindred refer to as a ghoul, though he quickly states this is not the same as the legendary corpse-eating variety seen in some stories. Instead, they are what results when a mortal drinks the blood of a kindred without first being drained of their own. They are free to walk in the daylight and do not suffer the hunger that the kindred must deal with, but they do not age so long as they continue to feed on kindred blood and bear some of the superhuman strength and reflexes of his kind. Sometimes such servants are valuable and need not be human, stating that stories of hellhounds likely arise from such creatures. Though ghouls bear some of a vampire's strengths, they still have the same general frailty of other mortals and can be killed more easily than a vampire. He notes that many may falsely believe themselves to be vampires, and some widely believed weaknesses may come from these creatures as well, and claims that some react poorly to religious objects because they believe they are supposed to. Most ghouls, he says, know little more about the truth of a vampire's strengths and weaknesses than do normal mortals, and this is often because their master intentionally misled them. Many often suffer mental illnesses from the experiences inflicted upon them in their time serving vampires. Next, Dracula comes to the creation of a vampire, called the Embrace. He continues to use popular media as an example and points out the ridiculousness of the idea that anyone bitten by a vampire will become one, or that those who die by suicide or had been an oathbreaker in life, etc., could become one. Such methods would have seen the world overrun with vampires long ago. Instead, a body must be drained completely of blood and then given the blood of a vampire to feed on. Even the smallest drop upon the lips will animate them and cause them to seek out more, drinking from their soon-to-be sire to complete the process. He speaks of his own embrace, noting that the act of being drained was one of the most peaceful experiences of his life, causing no pain and drifting away, but that what came after was more harrowing and excruciating than anything he had ever experienced. Even tortures wrought upon him as a prisoner of the Turks could not compare. Drinking blood was the only thing that even began to abate the pain, and he thanks the powers that be that he was not in a city when it happened, or chaos would have ensued. He could have killed his own family in that moment to sate the pain caused by that hunger, and prayed for death. Even now, centuries later, the extent of that pain remains fresh in his mind. He describes the events as something that he was not expecting, something that will change in later editions, and his brain railed at the knowledge of what was happening, speaking of being a man of education and reason who had discarded such superstitious fairy tales. What followed, he claims, was too distressing to continue to recollect. With that, Dracula comes to the anatomical matters of a vampire, stating that literature and film display a number of truths here. The canine teeth are sharpened and longer to facilitate feeding, but notes that they extend only when the time comes to do so, otherwise they are withdrawn in their sockets via the contraction of a flexible tissue at their base. It is said that there are some that exist that do not have this ability, but they are a dying breed, as it makes it much harder to hide from humanity. In addition, the pale complexion of the vampire also holds true, contributed to by their aversion to sunlight and arrested state of death, in addition to the lack of the blood in one's veins. The hair and nails continue to grow for a few short days after embrace, but then also stop, as it is as if they are frozen in time at the point of their death. Damage that is healed returns them to this state, and any changes one wishes to make to hair or nails from time of death must be made nightly. He believes the body is in fact dead, but decay is arrested by the power of the embrace, noting the skin is a little tighter on muscle and bone, similar to that of a fresh corpse. The hunger is, to put it plainly, the drive for food. In addition, real food that one may have enjoyed in life is no longer edible, having lost the ability to digest anything. He believes the internal organs wither, and notes that one seldom sees a stout vampire, and nearly all remark on a newfound slenderness after the embrace. This is also changed in future editions. Along with this, the body is incapable of producing its own blood and must be replenished from an outside source. The decay of death may be arrested, but it returns quickly if the vampire is destroyed, as though time is reclaiming the debt it is owed. This results in many vampires ending up as dust upon death, making much of this information based on conjecture due to the inability to dissect and inspect it for the truth. In addition, breathing is no longer necessary, though many fake it when among mortals. He believes that oxygen from the blood of a victim aids in sustaining the dead tissues of a vampire, and admonishes the young and foolish who might try to feed from the jugular of a victim, as it is where the spent, deoxygenated blood resides. It is the carotid artery that one should aim for to get the best blood. So too does the heart no longer work. He questions the method through which blood moves through a vampire, suspecting it is some sort of osmosis, as you could cut the veins of a vampire open and find no blood. But still, it must move through the body, as should a vampire cry, and he notes it is something they do more often than mortals may suspect. It is blood that they weep instead of tears. Despite the lack of blood in the veins, a vampire will often have a noticeable rosy hue shortly after feeding. Vampires are also able to heal themselves with remarkable speed. They do still feel pain, however, and infliction of an injury will often produce a small amount of blood as the body reacts instinctively to such things as it did in life. Thus, bruising can still also occur. The exception to this is the act of staking a vampire through the heart, which causes a state of complete paralysis. He is uncertain why this is, considering the heart does not even work any longer, and most explanations offered to him have been of a mystical nature and beyond his understanding. Finally, he speaks lightly of the concept of vampires as a potent figure of romance, but notes that though vampires of any sex can go through the motions of physical intimacy, willing their blood to the necessary places to make everything work, the drive, instincts, and response that go with such died with the body. Romance of an emotional nature is still possible, but the ecstasy of the kiss, feeding, has wholly subsumed physical pleasure. Next, Dracula attempts to describe the hunger, noting that mortals may experience hunger, even starvation, but that neither even begins to compare to the hunger a vampire experiences. Blood is a drug that they are wholly addicted to from their birth, and it puts to shame the drive and need of nearly every aspect of mortal life. Food, drink, reproduction, ambition, security. It is all of these things and more, personified into one ever-present fixation. The act of feeding is survival and a sort of physical, mental, and spiritual ecstasy all rolled into one, overshadowing even the most intense pleasure a mortal could ever feel. Beyond the hunger lurks the beast. To deny the hunger enrages the beast, and only feeding and willpower keep it in check. Thus, monstrous acts are required to keep from becoming monsters in truth. And with that, the famous words oft repeated through VTM history appear for the first time. Monsters we are, lest monsters we become. It is the paradox and curse of the vampire. Dracula delves further into the nature of the beast. It rages ever on, and the mind is a thin cage for it to throw itself against. The strong-willed can hold it at bay for longer than some, but it gnaws at the mind like a rat at a rope. Over decades and centuries, it is not a matter of if it gets out, but when, leaving behind a sense of guilt and regret in its wake when eventually recaptured. It haunts the kindred for the rest of their days as the fear it will happen again strains the remains of their humanity and claws at their sanity. As ages pass and the flame of humanity dwindles, the beast comes ever closer to being the victor. When it claims control in full, then a monster you have truly become with no way to return. The only way out of this predicament is the near mythical ideal of Golconda, a way to seek true balance between one's humanity and the beast, halting the descent into madness and safeguarding the vampire's humanity. Dracula claims to have met only a meager few who appear to have achieved this state. He then talks about the immortality of the vampire and their agelessness, but specifies that it is not without its dangers. Despite being undying, time is one of the kindred's greatest enemies. Loved ones die as you stay young, and you become unable to stay in one place for too long without raising the suspicions of the mortals. The guilt of the death you leave behind you is one way for the madness to seep in, but detaching yourself wholly from the mortal world can let the same madness in through another door. As time marches relentlessly on, the ways for the madness to lay claim and your humanity to erode become ever more constant, with the beast lying in wait for you to reach the end of your rope. Despite this, age brings greater power to the kindred, and with age also comes the cunning of surviving for untold years. Yet this creates further fear of losing oneself and being nigh unstoppable, leading the oldest of kindred to detach themselves from others to try and exist in solitude out of fear and paranoia of when they'll finally lose control. The dangers of the sun are not the only reason kindred are nocturnal. This is also the best time to hunt. Dracula notes that though mortals have trouble seeing in the dark, many kindred have no such issue. In addition, many mortals are reaching the end of their day and are fatigued and more easily preyed upon, while the vampire is fresh and rested. There are also fewer mortals around as people head home for the evening, making it harder to be caught as feeding is one of the kindred's most vulnerable points when the beast is close to the surface. Mistakes related to this have been the undoing of many young vampires. Here, Dracula describes the hidden world of vampires that exist within and alongside the mortal world. He uses the analogy of a king in his forest with the beasts and notes that they have their castles and such to be with their own kind. Likewise, the kindred keep their own places to interact with others of their kind, and any city of sufficient population likely has a number of them, and just as cities have communities and government leaders to dictate how society will function, so does the vampire world have clans and princes for such the same purpose. The prince of a city or territory sets the rules by which it is governed, and it is expected that a kindred entering a domain for the first time must introduce themselves to the prince or suffer dire consequences. Many kindred seek to become a prince themselves, as it is the only safe way to create a brood of your own. The prince decides who may embrace within a domain and will often limit other kindred to one at most, while they themselves can create many. While most princes seek to keep peace in their domains, there are exceptions. One such he refers to as a league of clans calling themselves the Sabbat, or the Black Hand, who revel in violence and their perverse and bestial natures, shunned by most of their kind. They are what mortals fear vampires to be, and they control much of eastern North America. Opposite these creatures stands the Camarilla, where individual domains ruled by princes could be seen as regional or national governments. The Camarilla then stands as something akin to the League of Nations. Dracula finds them approximately as effective as that body, but notes that he may soon test the theory in truth with the words he puts to paper. He notes that the leader of the Council of the Camarilla are very old and very powerful, each in their own right. They put heavy stock in the traditions of old, and in particular the Masqeruade. The clans have shifting allegiances that change much like the alliances of nations, and though some rules may be broken on occasion, there is something stronger than such things, stronger even than the natural ties of blood, which is known as the blood bond. The power of a kindred's blood works even on other kindred, and though the blood of another vampire is the sweetest tasting of all blood, it comes with it a dire consequence. Drinking from the same kindred on 3 occasions creates a bond stronger than that of sire and child, and indeed many vampire will force their children into a blood bond after creation. To be willingly bound to another is to give them your heart and mind in full, and should not be undertaken lightly. Dracula speaks of rumors that though the blood imparts immortality, as the ages pass, the blood will ultimately lose its inherent potency and must eventually be fueled by stronger blood. Where a newly made vampire may subsist on animal blood if so desired, age eventually causes this to lose its sustaining power. Likewise, even more extreme age leads to loss of sustenance from even mortal blood, leaving only the blood of other kindred. It is said the antediluvians prey on other kindred for this very reason. However, rumors spread that even younger kindred have begun to do this as well. He questions whether this is because the newest generation have blood that is not as robust as those of old and it fades in power sooner, or because they note the power of the antediluvians and seek to emulate them and gain more power for themselves. Thus, the ever-violent cycle of the jihad, the war of ages that sees the old and young exist in conflict and distrust. It is noted again that the blood bond does not work in reverse. A child cannot bond their sire, and in similar fashion, the antediluvians bear no such risk from feeding on kindred. Similarly, those who habitually feed on their own kind fear no such bond, for if they destroy that which they feed on, there is nothing to be bound to. Due in part to this fact, the act, known as diablerie in modern knights, is seen as a shocking and perverted thing to most kindred. Any who is known to be a diabolus may be killed outright by any who find them. The elders, he claims, deny rumors of the act outright, but this is to be expected. Admitting to it would surely ignite a revolution as terrible as the rise of the 4th generation. There is evidence of its truth, however. Dracula closes his document once more saying how he regrets his actions in the past and hopes the writings help her to understand what caused them. He does not ask for forgiveness, but hopes that Mina may take pity and pray for him. With these texts, she now knows more about vampire kind than any mortal living, more even than the illustrious Van Helsing who sought to destroy him. He states that he has changed much, and through much soul-searching believes he is close to reaching the fabled Golconda. He tells her to do whatever she chooses with his writings, though it could likely lead to the destruction of his kind. It is her decision to make. Whatever that decision may be, he wishes her and her family well, and says she will hear from him no more unless she wishes it. He signs the document, "Your most devoted and penitent servant, V.T." The section ends with a quote. "Now, reader, I have told my dream to thee. See if thou canst interpret it to me, or to thyself or neighbor, but take heed of misinterpreting, for that instead of doing good will but thyself abuse by misinterpreting evil issues." John Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress. The quote is taken from The Pilgrim's Progress from This World to That Which Is to Come, a Christian allegory for the spiritual journey from earth to heaven, and was written by John Bunyan in the late 17th century. It is regarded as the first novel written in English. Following this, we are met with a black 2-page spread that greets the reader, pencil drawings of a man leaning against a brick wall on one side and a moonlit tower on the other. A short story describes a first-person perspective of being fed on by a vampire, the ecstasy of the kiss as they begin to fade, and the sudden flare of heat as they are brought back from death by the embrace. The joy of feeding, and the pain of the blood being taken from them as their sire disappears as suddenly as they appeared, leaving them all alone with the darkness. This be death, the unmaking. From here, I plan to consolidate a lot of information found within the book. Initially, I considered following the style of my last video and truly presenting things in a format representative of the book's layout, but found that a lot of information throughout the chapters has a habit of restating things with slightly varied or additional info that would ultimately conflate what is already going to be an incredibly long video. Instead, I felt it would be much easier to present the info, and likely much easier for you all to process and reference if need be, if I consolidated it where I'm able. To this end, know that things you will see here, such as info on the clans, or the story of the ancient vampire Shelzza, were split up throughout the entire book, With the clans in particular, you will note some slightly contradictory info. Much of this was found separated by different chapters originally. There will be a link in the description where you can purchase a PDF of the original book if you'd like to experience the info as it was originally laid out. In addition, if you preferred the style of my previous video and want to see that return, let me know in the comments, and I can certainly return to it if the shorter length or organization of future books allows for it. With that, let's dig back in. First and foremost, we are told, this is a game, one of make-believe, pretend, and storytelling. Despite being a game, the goal is not to win, but to tell a story, to take a role in a dark and shadowy world of cursed, half-beast, half-angel creatures and experience the horror from the other side of the mirror. As a vampire, you must bear witness to the madness within you, to strive and overcome that which you cannot bear to face. Next is a modified version of the small narrative that was featured in the preview booklet for the game from the Ashes to Ashes section that I covered previously, that gives a basic accounting of the needs and wants and dangers of being a vampire, though it contains a few notable changes. First of all, use of Kindred instead of just kin to describe other vampires, and missing are mentions of Gehenna, the ending of the third cycle, and the Jihad or Game of Elders. But it also adds mention of other supernatural creatures, laying the ground for the world of darkness to come. Beyond the other kindred there are the Lupines, the Magi, and the Arcadian Brethren, and some say even the Shades of the Netherworld. Though not all are opposed to you, they do not tolerate your presence in their realms, but sometimes two fates become intertwined. Following this, we are greeted with sections detailing the concepts of storytelling and role-playing, as well as the function of the storyteller and the players, the contents of which are not pertinent to the focus of this video. Next, another familiar narrative appears, this time the one from the preview in A Culture of Blood section. Much remains unchanged here, other than basic terminology or spelling, kindred instead of kin, jihad spelled with a Y instead of an I, and so on. Other items seen from the vampire preview that are reprinted in the core book include the section Life and Death, which can be found at the beginning of Book 2, The Hunger, the section Monsters, Monsters Everywhere at the end of Chapter 4, and much of the Gothic Punk section is reiterated at the beginning of Chapter 8. The sections remain largely identical to their previous iterations. But first, on earth as vampires sent, thy corpse shall from its tomb be rent, then ghastly haunt thy native place, and suck the blood of all thy race. Lord Byron. First, the book reiterates the concept of a vampire, noting that players will generally take on the role of a fledgling, recently embraced and released from their sire's instruction. Survival is not guaranteed, and the dangers are many. Due to this, young vampires often band together in groups typically referred to as broods, or sometimes, by elders, as coteries, the term which eventually became the norm in future editions. We learn first of the act known as the Embrace. Much as Dracula described, creating another vampire by feeding a vampire's blood to the drained body of a mortal just before final and absolute death sets in. Here it speaks for the first time of lineage and that one embraced becomes the same clan as their sire. Being part of a particular clan affects the disciplines, vampiric powers, a vampire will have access to, as well as a specific weakness unique to that clan. From here, a neonate vampire will spend years or even decades with their sire being taught as much or as little as they see fit, nurtured or even abused, and given freedom or restricted at their whim. Until the sire presents the neonate to the prince and are released, they are not accepted in vampire society. As described previously by Dracula, the act of creating a vampire is a rather straightforward one. The blood must be drained completely away. Within 5 minutes of this act, perhaps longer for those with particularly potent blood, the sire-to-be must introduce their own blood into the dead or dying mortal, causing them to reanimate and begin to drink. This is sometimes done out of pity or guilt at what they've done, sometimes as part of careful planning, while for others, it is merely an act of revenge to curse someone to such an existence. Regardless, once a sufficient amount of blood is drunk, the ritual is complete. The change that occurs varies from case to case and can range from excruciatingly painful to extremely arousing. Once complete, the fledgling is generally ravenously hungry until their sire happens to feed them a large amount of blood, which is not common. In some cases, all the blood given to them gets used up in the process and they may frenzy upon awakening. This aspect of the embrace is regarded as the most unexpected and unpleasant part of it. It should be noted, a kindred often cannot simply create a new vampire on a whim without getting into trouble. The permission of the prince is required in any domain that recognizes one, and in many cases, some clans require their members seek permission as well. To kindred, the ties of blood are paramount. Despite mostly being loners, lineage bears tremendous importance to many of them, and a strong lineage is able to provide some entitlement of respect to those so lucky to bear it. Since the formation of the Camarilla, however, many young vampires have lost respect for the meaning of their lineage as the generations separate them from the powerful ancients that came before them. All bloodlines can trace their lineage back to an elder of the third generation. Some may no longer exist or have disappeared from the world, but the powers and curse they passed on through the generations remains. These greater bloodlines are more commonly known as clans. 7 clans take membership within the Camarilla and are discussed here in detail. These clans were the only playable choices when the game originally released, alongside the clanless caitiff, with others being added for use later. The other clans that exist are either confined to the cities which the Sabbat controls, or maintain some form of clan stronghold away from others. It is interesting to note that according to Rich Thomas, when the game was originally being developed, the clans were not meant to be permanent fixtures, but instead were presented as optional archetypes for characters, with the caitiff being the intended default for player characters. Each clan section features a quote from an unknown member of the clan before delving into the specifics about them, including powers and weaknesses, as well as their stereotypical views of the other clans featured here. It's best noted that if you are familiar with more recent editions of ETM, many of these clan descriptions are going to feel like the most basic and stereotypical description of them, with a lot of the nuance present later stripped away. In a couple of cases, there are very different elements to the clan that would later be attributed to others entirely. As the saying goes, they had to start somewhere. Bruja, the rabble. All creatures of sentience deserve to be free. It is our born right. When we overthrow this decadent system that attempts to rule us, we can overthrow the system that rules the mortals as well. We shall be the saviors of the earth. The Bruja have natural access to the celerity, potence, and presence disciplines. The Bruja are rebels who respect no authority and acknowledge no leaders. With this in mind, it comes as no surprise that their clan boasts the strongest support for the Anarchs. They are highly aggressive, stubborn, and often ruthless, choosing their progeny from the rebellious. They will often create more than one at a time, regardless of the blessing required or granted from a prince. Their fractious and rebellious nature was not always the norm, however. The Bruja trace their roots back to ancient Babylonia, and it is said that they secretly controlled Carthaginian culture. When Rome destroyed Carthage, however, the Bruja decided never again to become rulers, and due to this, it is one of the only clans whose elders advocate for the Anarchs. In the time since the fall of Carthage, the Bruja have become rebels of the Kindred world, constantly questioning and testing the traditions. Reminding them of their imperial past will be met with either confusion from those too young to know the clan's history, or extreme rage from those that do remember. Though there is often fractious infighting among the clan, and they rarely hold formal meetings, if a force rises up that threatens one of their own, they will all rise to the call and defend them regardless of disputes they may have. If the reason for this isn't found to be adequate, however, they will quickly become enraged. They rely on their chaotic natures to get results, and are often given more leniency than other clans due to their eccentricities. Even in formal Camarilla meetings, their beliefs and goals are disparate, with their only unifying quality being that they seek to overthrow the social system and replace it with one of their own, or nothing at all. They tend to be bullheaded and blind to other ways of thinking beyond their own beliefs. The Bruja tend to not stay in one place for long and will keep multiple havens. A common tactic is to ingratiate themselves with a random family via the use of their powers, staying with them for a few weeks before moving on, often embracing any particularly rebellious members on the way out. They have a habit of dressing in whatever the most outrageous or conflicting style of the time is, breaking with this theme only as a way of being the most rebellious amongst their clan. The clan's weakness makes it so they are more susceptible to frenzying. The clan flatly denies this, however, and will become exceedingly hostile if pressed on the issue often, ironically to the point of frenzy. Bruja stereotypical views of other clans. Nosferatu consider themselves the only ones who respect them. It is a dire injustice that they are rejected simply because of appearance. Tremere view them as manipulators and consider them their primary rivals. Ventru view them as hypocrites and conniving politicians. Gangrel approve of their ability to fight. Toreador feel they would make decent allies if not for their addiction to human vice. Malkavian believe they make good allies if you can put up with their weirdness. Gangrel, the Outlanders. The city is not our home. It is simply the only place where we are allowed to exist for long. To be sure, it is the outlands where we belong. Our people have become ill and deranged because we have lived in this purgatory so long and have grown dependent on the tainted blood of the mortals. The Gangrel have natural access to the Protean, Animality, and Fortitude disciplines. The Gangrel, Outlanders, and Loners who are known for their ability to shapeshift, Wanderers who rarely stay in one place for long, they generally do not keep havens. They prefer to exist in the wilds of the world and are a lineage of survivors. They do not despise the societies and cities of the mortals and other kindred, but they also do not require it. Unlike most kindred, they show little fear when crossing the territory of the Lupines, and have been rumored to befriend some of their kind. Known for their shapeshifting abilities originating from the Protean discipline, many believe the Gangrel only transform into wolves or bats. There are also rumored to be some Gangrel elders who can achieve the form of mist. It is said there is no record for who the originator of their line is, though they are rumored to be the same person the Romani people descended from. Despite this, there are rumors that their clan founder is still involved directly in the affairs of their progeny and cares for their well-being. The Gangrel pride themselves on the freedom from the machinations and manipulations of the Jihad for this reason. Their founder's concern for her progeny is equaled only by her concern for her mortal descendants, and are protected by her. Due to this, no kindred would dare harm or impede them, and the Gangrel in particular will aid the Wanderers and will be aided by them in turn. The Gangrel and the Romani share a close bond, and the Gangrel have adopted much of their culture from the Romani due to this. As Gehenna approaches, it is said that the interactions between the groups has increased substantially. Gangrel embrace from those who are capable of surviving on their own, and after embracing will typically leave their progeny with no knowledge to fend for themselves as they watch from a distance. Only when they've proven they can survive will they reveal themselves to the neonate and begin to teach them the true ways of their clan. The Gangrel often bear animal-like features due to their clan's weakness, which gives them a persistent animal-like feature every time they frenzy, making them more like the beast that dwells within. Over time, their social skills begin to dwindle as well if they amass too many of these changes. Gangrel stereotypical views of other clans. Nosferatu, kindred souls that they have much in common with. Tremere, true enemies. The Gangrel believe they are on a path that will destroy all of their kind. Ventru, leaders are needed, and these are no better or worse than any other. Toreador, viewed with contempt because that is all they have earned. To achieve more, they must learn to serve others and not just themselves. Bruja, true of virtue, but lacking the ability to see it through. Malkavian, immensely powerful, but woefully unable to tap the power at will. Malkavian, the kooks. Madness, you say? Do you fear me? Are you afraid of what I might do? Of what I might say? What a fascinating reaction! Don't you find it somewhat encumbering? The disciplines inherent to the Malkavian are Auspex, Obfuscate, and Dominate. It is believed that all Malkavian are completely insane, yet they possess uncanny wisdom and vision. The clan is home to both destructive and nihilistic members, as well as clowns and pranksters, and sense can only be made of some of what they do. They often have a reputation for being sadistic and holding little to no grip on any sanity that may be present within them, but in truth, these are a minority. Most of the clan often surprises other kindred with how sane they seem, and many have come to believe their reputation is undeserved. It is said that there is a long-standing tradition among the clan's members of playing practical jokes on kindred and mortals alike, and they earn prestige among the members of their clan for the best ones. These pranks can range from harmless fun to terminally dangerous. Many among the Malkavians believe that even the Jihad itself is a joke, created by the founder of their bloodline. The history of the Malkavians is shrouded in mystery, and though they have many tales about where they came from, even they do not believe most of them. One favored legend is that their madness can be traced to their founder being cursed by Cain. Before this time, he was considered the greatest of the third generation, and the power he held is now what keeps his progeny alive through his machinations in the Jihad. Those chosen for embrace by the Malkavian are individuals who are at the edges of their sanity, seeking those who have seen too much of the world's truth and hold a unique view of reality because of it. If they yet retain their sanity, however, the sire-to-be will make their embrace and becoming a harrowing experience in an attempt to push them over the edge. They will also embrace those who are close to death, as they believe that all mortals should have a chance to live out their natural lives. The clan's weakness is that all of its members bear some kind of derangement. Unlike derangements that can come upon a vampire but eventually be overcome, that of the Malkavian is permanent, and no amount of willpower can see it gone completely. The clan has little organization, and they come from disparate backgrounds and walks of life, and many either do not realize what they are, or spend much of their time denying it altogether. Stereotypical Malkavian views of other clans. Nosferatu. They are the truest and most amusing of all the kindred. Where the others try to hide what they are, the Nosferatu bear it for all to see. Tremere. They share an insight into the world, perceiving the truth of things, but choose to hide from it and strive to avoid the inevitable. Ventru. The most fun to play games with because of how serious they take everything. Gengrel. Very different from the rest, and all the more lonely for it. Toreador. Degenerates who do not realize that it is not a life they live, but an everlasting death. The realization of this would end their party forever. Bruja. Their vision is true, but in their fanaticism they are as blind as all the others. Nosferatu, the sewer rats. I don't look for trouble, but if it comes, I hide from it. Damn right, pretty boy. You may call me chicken, but I've known a lot of kindred over the years who got smart just a few seconds too late. If it's not like we can't die, it's just that it don't come natural anymore. Natural clan disciplines. Obfuscate, animality, presence. The Nosferatu are the clan who see the most physical change from their embrace, becoming hideous creatures. They are misunderstood and ostracized by most of the clans. Underneath their horrible visages, Nosferatu are some of the most practical and sane of the kindred. They prefer to keep to themselves and revel in using the powers of their blood to hide and discover the secrets of others, which they'll share among themselves. This leads to the Nosferatu often being the most informed of the kindred as well. It is believed that they revel in being dirty and disgusting and do little to try and improve that belief. Their appearance and smell is said to be revolting, but they find cheerfulness in their squalor, especially when other clans must deal with them in their own domains, being known to act grumpily and lewd to them. Despite this, they treat each other with politeness and geniality, and it causes one to wonder just how much of these supposed truths are just for show or the result of stereotype and harsh judgment. It is said that the Nosferatu founder was notorious for his rabid taste and monstrous impulses, but was a man of regal visage. However, his barbaric activities led to Cain cursing him in his wrath and putting the beast that dwelt inside of him on the outside for all to see. This nature is reflected in all of his lineage, and they are cursed to the same fate, but that despite their terrible appearance, they are one of the most sane of the clans, known for being calm and cool-headed. The clan is not close to their founder, and they do not knowingly serve him. The Nosferatu are the clan who see the most physical change from their embrace due to the curse passed down through the blood from their founder. They are twisted and monstrous on the outside, where most kindred are able to hide such things on the inside. The transformation post-embrace can take weeks to fully occur, and is said to be extremely painful both physically and psychologically. They generally embrace mortals who are already twisted in some way, and thought to be irredeemable. They consider the process too horrible to subject worthwhile humans to, and will use it as a way to give these dregs of humanity a second chance at redemption. Stereotypical Nosferatu views of other clans. Tremere, shady and always up to something. Ventru, too proper and stiff, as though always with a stick up their ass. Gengrel, they know who they are, and the Nosferatu approve of them. Toreador, empty-handed and in need of a spanking. Bruja, nice enough if you can get past their bullshit. Malkavian, creepy and untrustworthy. Toreador, the degenerates. I remember my first love, a beautiful woman with a silver laugh. For 10 years we were constant companions, but in the end I had to let her go. She begged me to take her, but I could not. You may call me cruel, but in the end I realized that she was not a real artist, but an imitator. She was unworthy. I don't think I have ever recovered. Natural clan disciplines, presence, celerity, aspects. The Toreador are known for their hedonism and lavish lifestyles, and they are said to be the most sophisticated of the clans. One could say the viewpoint that they are nothing but hedonists is a misinterpretation of their true nature, which is that of artists and protectors of the genius of humanity. After all, artists are so often misunderstood. The Toreador adore the passion and vigor of humanity and enjoy marveling at their creations. The Toreador have been involved in the arts through much of history, beginning with the first progeny of their founder, believed to be a pair of beautiful and artistically gifted twins. The founder, known as Arakel, was believed to be the leader of the cabal of third generation who slayed their own sires and is known to be particularly ruthless. Despite this, he favored his progeny and they were given much freedom to do as they pleased. They used this freedom to nurture the arts, and they were protected and allowed to do so through war and famine. The clan claims that they are still watched over to this day by the founder. Though not particularly organized, the Toreador are said to be fiercely loyal to each other and the art they claim to serve. They consider themselves as a whole the conservators of the greatest artists and deliberate on who to offer immortality to, and some of the greatest musicians and artists who have ever lived count among their number. Most chosen for embrace by the Toreador, in addition to being artists or musicians, are nearly always physically good-looking. Many attempt to continue their artistic pursuits even into undeath, and they search for a truth beyond what they fear to be a meaningless existence. Through this, they hope to find a means of salvation. Through this artistic pursuit, however, also lies their weakness. Prisoners as much as patrons of the beauty of art, they can be overcome and transfixed by things they find beautiful, becoming paralyzed by it, and finding themselves unable to move without the greatest exertion of willpower. This can last for minutes or even hours. Stereotypical view of other clans. Nosferatu. Believe they should be expelled from the Camarilla. Loathsome creatures, they hate all beauty and hate the Toreador out of spite for theirs. Tremere. Respect them for their dedication, but do not trust them. Ventru. The only other kindred with the refinement to appreciate the arts, though not as well as the Toreador do. Gangrel. Are they even kindred? There is no understanding them. Bruja. No ability to understand the accomplishments of civilization, but at least they can see the virtue of change. Malkavian. Chaos can be beautiful, but it would be a difficult existence to bear. Tremere. The Warlocks. We must survive Gehenna and establish the tenets of the New World Order once the horror is overcome. If we are to succeed, we must control the other clans. No more time can be wasted. If they cannot be convinced to aid us, they must be forced. Natural clan disciplines. Thaumaturgy. Dominate. Auspex. The Tremere, the most tightly bound and hierarchical of the clans, said to have sprung from ancient powers and are considered warlocks. The extremely rigid hierarchy among their numbers has allowed them to achieve great power among the kindred. Despite this, the other clans distrust them greatly out of fear and a sense that something is different about them, fueled by rumors about their origins. The Tremere clan has a major political center in the city of Vienna, though they maintain chantries on every continent. The clan is ruled by a council of 7 elders, and they keep a tight grasp and allow none outside of their lineage to view their inner workings. This is done through blood bonding all new Tremere to the 7 ruling elders. Through this, loyalty to the clan is near absolute. The few members of the clan that exist among the Anarchs are likely there only by order of their clan to further their various plots. The history of the Tremere is unique among the clans. They did not begin as wielders of magic or the thaumaturgy discipline, and their clan existed in a very different form until less than 1,000 years ago. It is said that an ancient order of wizards that existed deep in the Romanian mountains gave up their art for the power and eternal life of vampirism, and were embraced by an elder of the original clan. They combined their new powers with their ancient magics and quickly took control of the clan. They began to embrace many others of their order and devoured the blood of all the elders of the clan. It is hinted that the most powerful among them, named Tremere, managed to track down and slay the clan's founder. Other stories say they have no founder at all, and used mystical powers to achieve their current state, speaking of ancient blood magic that the elders of the now clan practiced before they turned to vampirism. Whatever the truth, their links to the power of the blood run deep, and the knowledge of such practices is passed from generation to generation, with the youngest viewing it as commonplace, being so used to it. Along with their peculiar lineage, the Tremere do not have a traditional weakness, and instead, the blood bond to the elders of their clan stands in its place. They are more tightly restrained than most kindred, and if their clan calls, they have no choice but to obey. Stereotypical views of other clans. Nosferatu. Could be useful servants, but quickly become intolerable. Ventru. Chief rivals for control of the Camarilla, too fractious to be truly effective. Gangrel. Noble in their own rustic way. Toreador. Idle hedonists who do not understand the doom of Gehenna will forever destroy their royal life. Bruja. Ignorant fools, unable to understand what they oppose, respect only power. Malkavian. They may seem normal, but their curse blemishes them all. Ventru, the Blue Bloods. The best way to get even with an enemy is to outlive them, because we are reasonable and above such petty concerns as vengeance. We are the leaders among our kind. Our colleagues do little to support the Camarilla, so we must bear the burden alone. Natural clan disciplines. Dominate. Fortitude. Presence. The Ventrue are old-fashioned and very tradition-bound as well as cautious. An elegant, honorable, and highly social type of kindred, they work hard to make their lives as comfortable as possible, and are most frequently found in leading roles in the Camarilla, though they consider the position of prince to be crude and decadent. Despite this, more princes come from Clan Ventrue than any other clan and are at the forefront of the Camarilla. They believe themselves a clan of the modern world, but often get stuck in the ways of the time period they were embraced in, continuing mannerisms and dress relevant at the time. They can regularly be found among the high society of the mortal world, and will typically be in control of a city's mortal politics and governments in some capacity. Due to this, other kindred will often turn to them if something goes wrong. They hold regular clan meetings in various parts of the world, including a Grand Council in London every 7 years. The Ventrue hold to a clan tradition that they will provide safe haven to any other Ventrue in need, and they have got in the habit of helping each other regularly even before a need may arise. In addition, the clan is very proud of its status among the other kindred, and often claim that it was their clan that founded the Camarilla. To this end, they are exceedingly protective of their reputations and will do anything to retain their grip on the power they hold. The Ventrue hold suspicion that their founder has actually been slain and replaced by an ancient Brujah. Though this belief wounds their pride, it provides them some protection and distance from the jihad, and places them in prime position to take leadership roles among kindred society. Though they do not know if this legend is true or not, it is held as a basic tenet of their clan. Due to the respect that they have garnered for their independence, they rarely persecute members of the Brujah clan openly. The weakness of the Ventrue is that of their rarefied palate. All Ventrue have some kind of restriction on what or who they can feed upon. These restrictions can appear in the form of physical, emotional, or even societal traits, potentially creating difficulty in finding blood that they can feed from. Stereotypical views of other clans. Nosferatu. They cannot help what they are, no matter how horrifying. Tremere. Impressed with their support of the Camarilla, but feel they have untrustworthy motivations. Gangrel. Uncouth, but highly trustworthy. Toreador. Tasteful and creative, but often unrestrained. Brujah. Bullies and rebels who cannot be controlled. Malkavian. Not nearly as crazy as they often pretend to be. Note the mention of Ventrue considering the role of prince distasteful, but then the mention of most princes being Ventrue. This is an example of things found in different sections of the book that did not mesh. It is also mentioned, but omitted here, that more Justicars are Ventrue than from any other clan, yet each clan has their own single Justicar. Likely these are details that changed over time in revision, with some mentions being missed before going to print. The other clans. It is said that there are 13 clans in total, but the others do not claim membership in the Camarilla. It is likely that there are even more clans than that, as the kindred who dwell to the east in various parts of Asia are secretive and may have clans of their own. The two best-known clans out of the 13 that are not represented in the Camarilla are the Giovanni and the followers of Set, who are mentioned here but not spoken about more until a later book. Also mentioned later in the book as part of the infamous sect known as the Sabbat are the clans La Sombra and Zamichi. Caitiff, the clanless. A more recent phenomenon that has occurred among the kindred are the caitiff, also known as the clanless. Those abandoned by their sires who are never trained and or whose blood may be too thin to manifest the signifiers of the clan they were embraced into are regarded as caitiff. They are generally looked down upon with disdain by others and are generally considered to be anarchs. Though some few have gained acceptance among kindred society, none have reached an age to gain any real power or status. Generally speaking, most vampires have a number of things in common in terms of physical traits and weaknesses, and there are a number of misconceptions about them that do not hold any unilateral truth in the world of darkness. Fangs. As noted previously, the fangs retract unless biting to feed, and licking of a wound created by them will cause it to heal. Blood. The blood lends vampires great power. They can heal wounds and even regrow limbs or organs given enough time, returning them to the state that they were in at death, including hair length, face shape, body weight, etc. They are already dead and thus cannot die except by the power of sun or flame. Use of the blood can allow them to achieve great feats of strength. Disciplines. Disciplines are supernatural powers that a vampire can access. There are 10 in total, but tend to flow along clan lines, limiting their availability. However, a vampire of sufficient power may be able to gain access to others beyond their clan's limitations. Weaknesses. Sunlight. A vampire needs sleep during the day, and the sun is deadly to them. Mere moments in the sun can cause the equivalent of third-degree burns, or in some cases may even set the vampire ablaze. Fire affects them similarly. A vampire trying to function during the day finds themselves extremely sluggish, and it is difficult to perform most actions. Frenzy. Due to the need to balance what is left of their humanity with their nature as a predator, vampires tend to lose their sanity very easily. Some may give over to their beast entirely, forgoing their humanity, while others turn the other direction, seeking the enlightenment of Golconda. Humanity. If the humanity that attaches a vampire to their roots as a person withers too far, they become detached from the world and may succumb entirely to their beastly nature. Pursuit by mortals. You are a monster. There are those in the world who need no other reason to hunt you to the ends of the earth and destroy you. To some, the Inquisition never truly ended. Hunted by other vampires. The oldest of vampires can no longer subsist on mortal blood and must hunt their own kind. Some believe this is the reason for the jihad, and causes much of the conflict that comes to pass between kindred. Misconceptions. Wooden stakes. A stake through the heart does not kill a vampire, but it will immobilize them and make them easier to kill. Mirrors. A vampire can in fact see their own reflection in the mirror, as well as appear on film, and some have even appeared in movies. Holy symbols. Though some with a particularly powerful faith may be able to use a holy symbol to fend off a vampire, it is not common, and the symbols themselves hold no power over the vampire. Entering without being invited. A vampire may enter any house at any time, and there is no such restriction for them. Running water. Running water does not inhibit a vampire in the least. Garlic. Though some particularly sensitive vampires may not care for the smell, garlic does not ward against them in any way. Disciplines. Disciplines are the supernatural powers a vampire possesses that set them apart from mortals. Their inherent abilities, such as their strength or speed, are the same as when they were immortal, and still comparable to those of a mortal in most cases. It is the disciplines that set them truly apart. They are the powers of the blood that can augment the natural abilities or perform other supernatural feats. The origin of these mysterious powers are unknown to the kindred, and most simply accept them as proof that they are now superior to the mortals they once were. I do not intend to lay out all of the individual powers from each discipline, as the specifics are not intrinsically important to lore at this time, but I will provide an overview of each to help with future references. Animalism. Animalism is a power that deals directly with the animal world, using the beast inside oneself as a bridge to reach out to the creatures of the wild. The ability to communicate, soothe, or control animals stems from these abilities, as well as many other aspects relating to such creatures, with the exception of transformation into animals, which stems from the power of Protean. Vampires without this discipline may find that much of the animal world is uncomfortable around them, sensing the beast that lurks in them all. Though not exclusive to them, Clan Gangrel are the kindred with the most intimate knowledge of this discipline, having named many of its abilities. In early chapters of the book, this discipline was originally written as Animality. Auspex. Auspex involves power of extrasensory perception, as well as heightened awareness, sensitivity, and empathy. This discipline's powers range from supernaturally augmenting all 5 senses, sensing auras, psychometry, telepathy, and even astral projection is possible. Celerity. Simply put, celerity is supernatural speed. It allows a vampire to move at higher speed and perform actions faster than a mere mortal could ever hope to accomplish. For those used to the 5th edition, it is interesting to note that celerity does not have individual powers and is instead an innate augment to the speed of a character. Dominate. Also known as the piercing gaze due to the need to hold eye contact for most uses. Dominate is the power to control the mind of another through sheer force of will. It allows a vampire to implant directives, erase memories, or even completely subjugate someone over time to do as you say in all things. Though it can affect the judgment of the person being dominated, it does not affect their emotions. These powers do not work on kindred of lower generations than the user. In addition, approximately 1 in a million mortals, known as neutrals, are immune to such powers. Members of the Inquisition are also sometimes known to have rituals to make them immune as well, and such hunters will often either be neutrals or have these rituals performed on them ahead of time. Fortitude. This is the power to resist damage to supernatural degrees, allowing a vampire who possesses this discipline to survive attacks that might incapacitate even others of their kind. This includes the ability to resist damage from the horrors of sunlight and fire, even if only to a certain extent. Much like celerity, this discipline does not have distinct powers that can be learned. Obfuscate. A power of the mind that allows the vampire to vanish completely from view or appear as someone other than themselves. In its most basic form, a vampire standing still with something to help obscure them can remain hidden from sight and gets progressively more robust from there. At higher power levels, they can remain hidden indefinitely or even hide others with them. The power is directly opposed to Auspex, and those with Auspex may have a chance of spotting a vampire even while under the powers of Obfuscate. In addition, some children may be able to see through the illusion if they have not yet developed a more adult perception of reality. Potence. This is the source of the supernatural strength the vampires are known for. With it, a vampire can perform feats of strength far beyond mortal abilities, including the ability to jump greater distances or lift things that might not normally be able to lift. As with celerity and fortitude, there are no individual powers for potence here, unlike 5th edition. Presence. Presence is a supernatural level of charisma that allows you to hold sway over the emotions of others. It is not something the vampire can turn on or off, but is simply something that they are. It affects everyone in sight of the vampire and does not require eye contact. Unlike Dominate, you cannot command others, but Presence allows you to manipulate their emotions, subtly swaying their feelings and making them more pliable. Mortals enthralled by the power of Presence, unlike those who are dominated, maintain freedom of action and creativity, which can potentially be a blessing or a curse. Protean. The supernatural ability to transform oneself in part or in whole. With these powers, a vampire may be able to see in the dark or grow long, sharp claws in battle. It also allows them to meld with the earth, turn into a bat or wolf, or even turn into mist at high levels. These transformations take a toll over time, however, and the vampire begins to take on mutated or unnatural features. Thaumaturgy. Thaumaturgy is a power that allows the vampire to create feats of magic and is one of the more difficult powers to use and control. It is primarily the domain of the Tremere, and they guard their secrets with jealousy. Thaumaturgy consists of 4 separate types of mystical power: blood, fire, telekinesis, and weather control. This discipline also gives access to powerful rituals that can be cast often using material components and an extended period of time that can place a ward on their resting place or protect them from grievous harm. The 4 paths or forms of magic accessible to them provide control over blood, the ability to move objects with the mind, conjure fire of varying sizes, and create a variety of weather phenomena. Generations. There are many generations among the Kindred, designated by the distance they stand from Cain, the original vampire. The further the distance becomes, the thinner one's blood and the weaker the vampire's potential. Kindred will often be identified by the generation they are a part of, it being included with their name alongside their lineage. In modern Knights, the 13th generation is the most common, though it should be noted the generations do not necessarily correlate with age. A vampire of the 10th generation could be twice as old as one of the 6th, for example. Another feature of generation is the ability for those of lower generation to dominate the wills of those that come after them. The only way to change one's generation is through the act of diablerie, shifting down one effective generation when completing the act. Cain. Tradition holds that the biblical Cain, slayer of his brother Abel, is the sire of all kindred. There is much controversy over this idea, however, as there are none who yet exist that can claim with any certainty to have met him. If any of the 2nd generation still exists, they do not speak of it, and though some of the 3rd generation have made claims to meeting a powerful kindred who may have been Cain, such things are unconfirmed. The truth of the matter is one of the greatest mysteries of kindred heritage. 2nd generation. According to existing translations of the Book of Nod, the Bible-like history of Cain and the birth of the kindred, the number of 2nd generation was only 3. Cain, in his sorrow, created them to live with him in the city of Enoch, but nothing specific is known of them. If the book is to be believed, all of them were slain either in the Great Calamity or the First War that followed the flood, and the 3rd generation are loath to speak of their sires. Were any of this generation to exist today, they would be nigh all-powerful, akin to demigods. 3rd generation. It is believed that 7 members of the 3rd generation yet exist, but that only 2 of them are known widely by name, Lucian and Mekhet. Kindred of this generation are known as the Antediluvians. All lie hidden, tangled in their own machinations within the jihad, relying on guile, deceit, and subterfuge. They seem to spend most of their time keeping track of one another and attempting to interrupt and foil one another's plans, using all others as pawns in their games. One belief is that some of their kind have reached Golconda and seek to assist others in achieving the state as well, while the others attempt to interfere with this process, locking them in an eternal struggle. The third generation are ancient and supremely powerful with abilities that can only be guessed at by their lessers. It is said that they are the last generation to have full mastery over life and death, and can only truly fall to final death if by choice or by the hands of someone of equal power to themselves. Fourth and fifth generations. Also known as Methuselahs, these vampires are nearly as powerful and equally as secretive as the antediluvians. They are choice pawns in the machinations of the jihad, as they often have power and influence over other kindred. This interference by the antediluvians' hands has seen their numbers dwindle severely, and few of them remain active, often becoming a Kanu to avoid the influences of the jihad or out of fear of diablerie. It is said that the entirety of the Camarilla inner circle is made up of fourth generation kindred, and that the true purpose of the Camarilla is to blunt the influence of the third generation on younger kindred. Though the blood of Cain begins to dilute at this point, the fourth generation are still extremely powerful and likely have complete mastery over at least 2 or 3 disciplines. Sixth, seventh, and eighth generations. Vampires old enough to think that they have the power to resist their elders, these generations consist of many princes and others of influence or leadership among the Camarilla or their own clans. Often members of these generations have reached their maximum potential in 1 or 2 disciplines. Generally, the 8th generation is the last to be considered elders, often in part because most were embraced before the current age of man and have a more archaic bearing. 9th and 10th generations. Though some can be considered elders, these generations associate themselves more with the younger kindred and are frequently called ancilla, though the classification has more to do with age than generation. They often act as a bridge between the gap of the older and younger generations on either side of them. 11th, 12th, and 13th generations. The youngest generations of kindred, they are often referred to as neonates. They are still powerful in their own right, but often lack the most unique and powerful of the gifts granted by Cain's blood. Typically born within recent memory, they are subject to being products of a society that has seen rapid change and advancement, setting them apart from the lower generation. The Book of Nod. Here, we are first introduced properly to the Book of Nod. A short description explains that this legendary book is the oldest known history of the vampire. It takes its name from the lands east of the Garden of Eden, to which Cain was banished to wander after the murder of his brother Abel. It speaks of his rise and fall at the beginning of the vampiric bloodlines. It is unknown if the tome holds fact or fiction, and many, in particular the anarchs, look upon it with scorn. None but the antediluvians themselves might be able to verify its words, but even their existence is not truly believed by some. The passages given described Cain's crime, and the curse that was given to him in the form of immortality and a lust for blood. That he is the origin of the vampire, our sire's sire. It speaks of his suffering and loneliness as he wandered for an age. After an eon had passed, his sorrow began to abate, and he sought once again the world of man. Walking among the children of his brother Seth, they recognized his power and began to worship him, and made him the king of their great city, known as Enoch. Despite this, he still felt alone, for no other was like him, and his sorrow began to grow once more. From there came another great sin that he would commit. He created progeny. Only 3, but from them came more progeny. At this Cain proclaimed, "An end to this crime! There shall be no more." As his word was law, his brood obeyed him. The city stood for many ages and became a great empire, but then came the great flood that washed over the world, and the city and its people were destroyed. Cain believed the flood was sent as punishment for him daring to return to the world of men, and fell into a great sorrow once more, and left once again, leaving his childer to their own ends. Though his childers sought him out to beg his return and his aid to rebuild the city, he turned them away. Returning to the few mortals left, they declared themselves the new rulers. Each created their own brood to be like unto their father, but showed not his wisdom, nor his restraint. In time, a great war took place, and the children rose up against their elders and slew them. They built a new city, and brought 13 tribes to it, and were worshipped as gods. Like their sires before them, they created new progeny, a 4th generation. Also, like their sires before them, they forbade them from creating their own. Any who were created were hunted down and killed, and their sire killed with them. Though this city was as great as Cain's, it too eventually fell to ruin, and the gods were forced to flee with their broods, though many were killed in the flight, having grown weak. With their authority gone, and their kind scattered across the face of the earth, the 4th began to create progeny of their own, and soon there were many new kindred. Over time, they became too many, and they began to fight amongst themselves. The elders were already in hiding by this point, where their childhood had founded their own cities and broods and went to war with one another. So great was the bloodshed that none remain of that generation who were there, but memories remain of those such as Odysseus, Xerxes, and Alexander. After this time, the kindred went into hiding, both from mortals and from one another, and so they remain to this day. The Tale of Shelzza. This narrative, broken up amidst the entire book, is presented via a series of images and brief text. It begins by depicting the arrival into an ancient city by a vampire known as Shelzza, sometimes misspelled as Shezla. Followed by her feeding and then hiding in a mausoleum for the day, she is discovered by 3 men who, quote, smell of elder blood, and she is commanded to come with them. She is led through the streets of what we learn to be Babylon and taken to its king, whom she discovers is one of her kind. He shows her the wonders of his palace, and over the course of the following nights bind themselves to each other. Though they cannot fully experience love, the king makes her his queen and they rule side by side. The people of the city do not trust her. Over time, ill feelings grow to whispers and whispers to open dissent. They begin to rise up and attack the palace, demanding their king be rid of her. In their anger, they set fire to the palace, and the deadly flames begin to close in. Though the king is ancient, the power of his blood is like paper to the flame, and he succumbs to the blaze. Shelzza flees from the flames, but it is yet daylight, and the rays of the sun burn through her body. As she begins to succumb to the power of the sun, her body is pulled downward into the earth. Near death, she sleeps in the ground and dreams of her king. It is unclear at what point in Babylon's history this might take place, as the city existed for many centuries. Awakening centuries later, and more powerful for it, Shelzza rises. The past is beginning to blur, but the memories of her king remain. She finds herself in Tripoli, which is held by crusaders. Mortal affairs mean little to her, however, and she places King Philip II in her thrall, wishing to see more of the world. She is exhilarated by the open sea air, but this feeling soon turns to revulsion as they come upon a ramshackle city and she mourns the glory of Babylon. It should be noted that Babylon resides near what is today Hilla in Iraq, whereas Tripoli is in Lebanon, some 600 miles or 1,000 kilometers from Babylon, so it is unclear how she ended up there unless she drifted while asleep in the ground. In addition, King Philip II most likely refers to Philip II of France, who was part of the Third Crusade, which did pass through Tripoli, placing the time period of her awakening around the late 12th century. She decides to re-enter the earth and sleep more, giving the world time to progress and improve more to her liking. She awakens again in the Renaissance era and commissions Michelangelo for a painting of the Babylonian palace she remembers so fondly, placing this sometime in 1512. Through the years, Shelzza travels, enjoying Paris despite the illness there, as she kept the company of the nobility, possibly the plague of 1619, and enjoying the energy of the New World despite its youth, early 1700s. Her travels continue to the south of the New World colonies, where she finds she feels most at home, but is eventually drawn to the excitement of Chicago during the Prohibition era, 1920s. Chicago maintains its allure even as decades pass, and she chooses to settle in the city, remaining there into modern nights. Here the story shifts perspective. We are introduced to Kyle, who has an eye for painting but no skill and thus takes up photography. He leads a full and happy life with a wife and child. One day, he receives a flyer from an art exhibit, Midnight Michelangelo. Michelangelo is Kyle's idol, and he chooses to attend. At the exhibit, he loses himself in admiration of the works. With this, we return to Shelzza, who is also at the exhibit. She gazes upon Kyle in exultation. Her king has been reborn. Though he is now mortal, he will soon be hers again, forever. She will not take him now, though. He must come to her. She follows him, learning about him and to prepare him for his embrace. At home, Kyle senses something, as though he's being watched, but he peers out his window and sees nothing in the moonlit night of his yard. Later, he receives an invitation, a chance to join a private screening for a lost work of Michelangelo. He's excited to be attending the private screening of the mysterious Michelangelo painting and arrives to find it is a very private screening indeed. As he scrutinizes the painting, he determines that it is an authentic Michelangelo, but is confused as to why he might paint a Babylonian palace. Meanwhile, Shelzza lurks in the background, unable to hold back any longer. She approaches Kyle and touches him, giving in to her urges shortly after. Kyle attempts to move away from her but is caught by her gaze and loses control of himself. She moves in to feed, the fragrance of his blood overwhelming despite being that of immortals. She feeds until he is no more, gazing down upon his lifeless form as she prepares to bring her king back into the world. Kyle drinks from Shelzza's wrist, struggling to keep his mouth open, the blood melting away almost as it enters him, tremors of renewed existence racking his body. Shelzza watches the transformation, marveling at the struggles and recalling her own embrace so long ago. As the change comes upon Kyle, he is lost for a time in the blissful world his mind creates, but eventually he comes out of his reverie, incapable of any thought beyond the need to rest as the sun rises. He crawls to lay beside the woman who has ruined his life. When he awakens again, it is night once more, a hunger stirring deep inside him demanding attention. Searching for food, he finds only jars of blood. Taking too long in his search, Shelzza awakens and bids him walk with her. His senses changed in subtle ways. The air of the city feels different now. The men who walk the streets around him seem akin to animals. Suddenly, Shelzza attacks a man. Kyle is repulsed by the act and yet drawn to it at the same time. Tentatively, Kyle lowers his face to the man's neck and feeds upon his blood. The taste exhilarates him, but the realization of what he has done horrifies him. Tears stream from Kyle's eyes as he comes to his senses after the frenzy that came over him. As the liquid finds his tongue, it becomes clear quickly that the tears are not normal. He is crying blood. Fleeing, he finds himself at his home. Unable to smother the thoughts and desires that plague him, he feels a stranger in this place that was once so familiar. Entering the house, he finds himself in his son's room. He feels a powerful urge to touch the child, to feel proof that his old life created something of value. Entering his own bedroom, his wife awakens as he approaches. He holds her, wanting to feel human again, but knows it cannot last. He must let her judge him. She must see what he's become and know what he has done. He looks her in the eye, but upon doing so, her will slips away. He gets chills and feels as though he cannot move, but forces himself to flee from her. Outside once more, he tries to lose himself in a crowd, but he can find no peace there, the scent of their blood filling him as he walks. The passers-by seem to shy away from him as if they can sense his true nature, and he eventually finds himself in a bar. The sight of his reflection in a glass grabs hold of him, and he loses himself to it for hours. A song pulls him from his entrancement, and he finds an old man in the alley outside the bar singing. The song of his blood is louder still. He drinks too deeply, and the life of the man fades. Even as he tries to block his actions from his mind, he is lifted in the air, and all he can see is the blood of the old man draining away into the sewer. His assailant is another Kindred, an elder who warns him to return to where he came from, or find new hunting grounds. With nowhere to go, he stumbles back to the midnight Michelangelo showing, seeking inspiration. He gazes upon the statue of David and is found once more by Shelzza, who has returned to the scene of her crime. Reflexively, Kyle flees. He may come to accept what he is in time, but not with this woman. Shelzza has other plans, though. She will have her king, and even if he must be her puppet, that is at least better than not having him at all. Shelzza takes control of Kyle's mind, commanding him to follow her. Though he cannot disobey, his mind is still his own. He feels death would have been better than an existence such as this, but maintains courtesy and manages to charm the ancient vampire. They retire to rest for the day. Later, as the sun begins to set, Kyle wakes before her once more. He finds that his limbs are again under his own control. Grabbing up the first object he can find, he tears it apart in delirium, not yet realizing what it is he destroys. In a fit of rage, Kyle takes a large piece of wood from the shattered frame of the painting and plunges it deep into the heart of his creator and tormentor. Though Shelzza is of such an age that pain is nigh unknowable, a wild fear surges through her as the wood strikes home, leaving her unable to move. As if instinctually, Kyle knows that his work is not yet complete. He creates an impromptu torch, ready to cleanse the world of a long-endured evil. Kyle watches from outside as the building burns in the conflagration. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Kyle returns home to his family, all vestiges of the beast somehow gone. The memories of those horrible nights, however, will never fade. Overall, it seems likely this story was conceived before a number of elements of the world of VTM were entirely concrete, and likely as a result of this, these characters are never referenced again after this book. Shelzza seems to be a Toreador based on her penchant for beauty and art, as well as the weaknesses shown via her childer Kyle. Despite this, she has a number of powers that she might not normally have in that case. In addition, the end resulting in her death curing Kyle's vampirism is another thing that doesn't quite hold true in the overall lore, but there are other examples in the first edition of the game that will come up in later books that stretch the setting's rules and boundaries a bit, as you will see in future videos. I think of isolation and abstinence, and how each is so cruelly dependent upon the other. There are times I cannot stand to resist any longer, yet when I do feed, I cannot abide the sight of the blood that is upon my hands. Tamilari, Personal Recollections. The Hunger. As Dracula noted in his letter, the hunger claws at all kindred. The death of a feeding victim is not necessary, but that bloodlust, especially with older vampires, causes them to lose their restraint when they begin to feed, and it can be hard to avoid. Here we learn that the wound caused by the teeth is generally small and can be licked to seal it closed, causing the wound to disappear. As only a small amount of blood is given to turn one into a kindred, the first thing they know is a lust for blood, driving them to near frenzy that only willpower can keep them from. Vampires need to feed once or twice a week, on average. Humanity. As previously noted, humanity plays a large part in resisting the beast and maintaining a link to a vampire's human nature, but humanity affects other things as well. Low humanity can begin to limit the vampire's empathy, making it more difficult to wake during the day if there's an emergency, and can make it more difficult to resist frenzy. Lower humanity can also cause a vampire to stay in torpor longer than those with high humanity. The blood. In this section, we learn more about the nature of blood and the vampire. A vampire does not need to kill to feed, but it is an option, and will offer up more blood for them if not. Once the vampire has bitten their victim, the victim ceases to struggle and succumbs to the ecstasy of the kiss. If more than half of a person's blood is taken, they are at serious risk of death and will likely need to be hospitalized, but less than half is something they can survive. Injury. Though vampires are already technically dead and immortal, they can still be damaged and potentially killed. Blood can be used to heal damage taken, including more severe damage from the likes of fire, the sun, and other supernatural creatures, though it is more difficult to do so. If too much damage is taken, the vampire may fall into torpor, an extremely deep sleep that can last years or even centuries depending on the circumstances and other factors such as their humanity. Vampires in torpor may be able to perform small actions once the duration of their torpor is up in an attempt to gain blood and revive themselves. They may also enter torpor willingly, but if they run out of blood while asleep, they will be unable to rouse themselves until a torpor would naturally expire. Excessive or prolonged damage, particularly from a source of weakness, can bring them to final death. A vampire that meets final death will begin to disintegrate, leaving behind nothing more than a pile of ash in mere minutes. Vampires can be killed by fire, the sun, being drained of all their blood by another of their kind, as well as decapitation. Things that cause excessive body damage, such as deep water pressure or explosions, can result in final death as well. Most mortal diseases have no or little effect on the vampire, but they can potentially carry and spread such diseases to those they feed on. However, there may be some vampiric diseases that can cause the vampire harm and even result in final death. Despite popular myth, a stake through the heart does not kill a vampire, but it does paralyze them, at which point they will begin to deteriorate and lose blood over time, eventually putting them in torpor if not removed. Frenzy. Vampires are apex predators and hunters at the top of the food chain. The beast lurks within them, always looking for a way out, and in modern nights, this is often a detriment to the vampire's survival, and they fight to keep it in check. Despite best effort, sometimes the beast gets out. Something sets it off, and it comes to the fore, ready to do what it must. These situations are referred to as a frenzy. The sight of fire or sunlight, the scent or sight of blood when too hungry, or even being angered beyond a certain point can all trigger a frenzy if the vampire's self-control is found lacking. Depending on the cause of the frenzy, the reaction the beast has may differ. A frenzy induced by blood causes an extreme bloodlust that forces the vampire to seek out any and all sources of blood nearby. A rage-induced frenzy will cause them to attack and attempt to destroy everything in sight. Though they will head for the thing that caused the frenzy, anything that gets in your way, friend or foe, will be a target of the same wrath. Finally, a frenzy triggered by exposure to fire, sunlight, or other sources of extreme danger are known as a terror frenzy. Under this type of frenzy, the beast will take over, and everything they do will be with the goal of fleeing. Even if there is nowhere to flee, the frenzy will persist for some time. Derangement. Sometimes a vampire does not escape a frenzy mentally unscathed and develops a derangement from the experience. These are often a temporary but inhibiting quirk, tic, or neurotic habit. Though frenzy is not the only way a vampire may incur a derangement, it is a more common one. In the case of one caused by a frenzy, the type of frenzy may affect the outcome. A madness frenzy might result in hallucinations or delusions, mental regression, developing an addiction, or an attachment to something. A rage frenzy could result in a sense of overconfidence, cynicism, obsession, or they could begin to overcompensate for things, or even shut down internally and try to exhibit an overabundance of restraint in all things after losing control. A terror frenzy may come with an unnatural fear of death, paranoia, amnesia, depression, a fear of other vampires, or even send the vampire into a state of catatonia. These are far from the only derangements that can be expressed, however. Diablerie. Diablerie, also called amaranth, is the means by which the young can overcome the old. It is one of the reasons the jihad exists, why neonates seek to slay their sires, and why the elders mistrust and persecute those underneath them. It is the act of a vampire draining the blood and ultimately the soul of another vampire and taking their power unto themselves. Some would say that in this way, balance is attained. The oldest of kindred hunt the young for sustenance, and with the amaranth, the young so too hunt the old to grow in their power. The eternal struggle made manifest. If the vampire consumed is of an older generation than the Diablerist, their generation is reduced by one, allowing them greater dominion over their kind than they had before. It can be very difficult to perform successfully and will often come at the cost of loss of humanity. Blood Bond. The Blood Bond, also known as the Blood Oath, is a way for a vampire to hold power over another vampire. In this relationship, the vampire that holds regnant over another is known as the Regent, while the vampire who is bonded is known as the Thrall. Often it is the elders who hold this power over neonates, and is often seen as part of the jihad. A stronger elder who holds many in regnant has a large pool of retainers whom they can trust. The creation of a blood bond requires the exchange of blood between two vampires. The one being put under the bond must drink their regent's blood 3 times on 3 separate occasions, generally different days. Any amount of blood will do, though the older the kindred from whom the blood derives, the smaller the amount that is needed. Younger generations can even bond those of lower generations, giving them potential power over their elders. The bond can be reinforced, becoming stronger with additional feedings. Many regents will have their thralls drink of their blood multiple times a year out of fear of a weakening or broken bond resulting in vengeance laid upon them from their former thrall. This also results in many thralls being treated well, at least at face value, as hate that builds up under the adoration from a blood bond can ultimately weaken it as well. Once bonded by a vampire, they cannot be bound again, though a vampire can be bound to more than one vampire at a time if the blood from each of them is mixed and drunk together. This is often used as a punishment by the Camarilla, forcing an offending vampire to be bound to all present at a conclave. This is similar in function to how the Tremere will bond each neonate to 7 elders of the clan, diffusing their sense of devotion among multiple parties. A newly embraced vampire is already one step towards being bonded by their sire, as the act of being given blood that created them counts towards it. The bond is primarily an emotional thing. Thralls will view the vampire that bonded them with an intense affection, devotion, or obsession, becoming a central figure of their life. Some might mistake the feeling for love, and even if they truly despise their regent, they will still be compelled to do nearly anything to aid them. The regent also has additional power over their thrall. In particular, powers of the dominate discipline do not require eye contact, and merely hearing their words will suffice. The bond can also give insight into the mood and or feelings of the thrall, and the regent may even be able to intuit their location. For a thrall to disobey their regent, it takes a powerful strength of will, becoming increasingly difficult with more outright betrayal, such as attacking them. Under most circumstances, the bond compels the thrall to do most anything asked of them, though if it requires them to risk their life, they are able to deny the task. In cases where the regent's life is in danger, however, they might be compelled to act in their defense even if it could end in their death, especially if the bond has been reinforced over a long period of time and they were treated well. Though it is possible to break a blood bond, it is incredibly difficult to do so, requiring massive expenditures of willpower and necessitating the thrall be completely absent from their regent and objects associated with them, causing the bond to eventually die away. Depending on the nature of the thrall's personality, some may be able to break the bond easier, while others may not be able to escape it at all. It is also rumored that the Sabbat know how to break the bond, but one must pledge themselves to the sect before it will be taught. Whether true or not, this has led to many who resent their bondage to flee to the Black Hand, fearing them less than the servitude under an elder they have no wish to serve. Ghouls. A mortal who drinks the blood of a kindred without having been drained of blood and dying does not become a vampire, but a ghoul instead. As long as they continue to feed on vampire blood regularly, they do not age and may even gain some of the powers of a vampire while still being able to move about in the sunlight. Typically, a ghoul will have, at minimum, some ability in the potence discipline, but can gain access to celerity and fortitude over time as well. Ghouls more than a few hundred years old may have high ratings in all 3, but they rarely live that long. In very rare circumstances, it is rumored that ghouls may gain access to other disciplines as well, though the method through which this occurs is unknown and may be related to having blood from a particularly old vampire. Along with the powers of the blood, ghouls are also susceptible to frenzy, though it is much more difficult for it to affect them than it is for the kindred. In addition, a ghoul need not be only human. Animals can also be given this power, though generally the animalism discipline is required for the creature to obey. It is not uncommon for vampires to create ghouls, as it gives them access to loyal servants who can protect them and perform tasks for them during the daylight hours. However, it has been ruled by the Camarilla that permission is also required for a kindred to create a ghoul, though in many cases a prince does not concern themselves with such matters unless the practice becomes excessive. It is not inherently considered a breach of the masquerade to create a ghoul, as long as they do not speak to others of their condition. Most are told very little, however, and are too fearful of their master's wrath to relay much of anything. Ghouls are also susceptible to the blood bond, and after 3 feedings are tied to their master completely. However, if they go without receiving blood for a month, the bond will cease and they will become mortal again. However, once a ghoul has passed their normal lifespan, they must always have vampire blood in them, or they will age and die rapidly, within days or even hours, depending on their age. Golconda. Golconda is a mythical state that a vampire may seek to elevate themselves to, a way to permanently resist the beast and gain total control over their own life. It is not a reconnection to one's humanity, but instead a state of being where the vampire obtains acceptance and thus control over one's nature, mastering the beast by accepting that it is and has always been a part of you. It is true acceptance of the curse of vampirism and the gaining of power over it, making the vampire immune to frenzy and the need for blood drastically reduced. Achieving Golconda is incredibly difficult and incredibly rare. It is said that there is an antediluvian who attained Golconda and supports those who spread word of it, and whose role in the jihad is one of stopping his fellow ancients from destroying the younger kindred. There may be a few among the Incarnu who know the truth of these claims, but they do not readily share this info if so. Rebirth. There are rumors and myths about the ability for a kindred to regain their mortality. Considered impossible by most, the methods whispered of are many and varied. None have been proven, and a life of dedication to this cause is likely the only way to find if it is even possible. Such rumors include the slaying of one's sire, or somewhere even further up the ladder of generations, possibly straight back to the antediluvian of the vampire's clan itself, an impossible feat if it really stretches back that far. Selflessly sacrificing themselves to save the life of another. Though this ends in death, it is said that a true sacrifice might render the vampire mortal again in the moments of their final death, freeing them from the vampiric curse and ushering them towards whatever afterlife there might be for mortals. Whispers speak of myriad and complicated rituals that can be performed using rare and exotic ingredients. Even the slightest misstep could result in final death without salvation. Some say that in the final stages of attaining Golconda, one can choose to turn away from the final summit and instead reclaim their mortal life. Most elders deny this outright, but it is unlikely they themselves have ever reached the state to know one way or the other. Example narrative. This is a narrative from Chapter 6 of the book that ran parallel to an example of gameplay, telling the story of the game being played. The parallel narratives begin with the gathering of anarchs in Chicago, told from the perspective of a Nosferatu named Elicid. They traverse the city to arrive at the meeting in a brewery next to a high-end restaurant known as Dally's. He climbs to the roof of the restaurant and leaps to the brewery roof from there, as access to the building is only available by the rooftop. There were about 15 other kindred present, all of the dregs of their society. Among them, a young black boy and a ragged man with a drugged look. The one speaking to them was supposedly a vampire known as Juggler, who was visiting Chicago from Gary, Indiana. He claims to be free from the power of the prince, speaks of banding together, that united they could overcome the power of the elders and be free of their oppression. Elicid is unimpressed with their rhetoric. His nature as a Nosferatu meant others tended to leave him alone, and he stays out of their business as well. However, as he prepares to leave, another voice speaks up. Coming from above, it addresses those gathered as though they are garbage, gathered together in one pile. Elicid turns to look and sees a large man, whom they identify as the sheriff to the prince, and his deputy, known as Kyle. With their appearance, many of those gathered begin to move toward the exit. The sheriff admonishes them and says they shouldn't be so hasty to leave. He notes that his men have drenched the top of the building in gasoline, and if they are not the first to exit, then it will be set alight with all of them in the building. The drugged-looking kindred confirms, saying he can smell the fuel. The sheriff then turns to Juggler, saying that this is Ballard's turf, and they should have known better than to be seen here. As he motions for Juggler to rise, he lashes out against another kindred nearby, throwing him into a wall and smashing his guitar, commenting on disliking the music he had been playing. With this act, Elicid can contain his rage no longer and tries to tackle the sheriff, noticing as he does that the black kid he had seen when entering leaps on Kyle's back as the other man circles to attack from the rear. The attempted tackle fails, however, and the sheriff sidesteps and kicks him as he trips on the guitar, hitting the ground face first. Others attempt to flee, but the sheriff warns again about the danger that awaits should they leave before himself and Kyle. They stop, and the sheriff says perhaps they can write this all off as a misunderstanding, suggesting they leave before they all end up on fire. The wisdom of this is taken into account, and Elicid motions the other two away from Kyle, and they follow them closely as they head back up the stairs, knowing that staying as close as possible to the two is the best way to survive. They reach the exit to the roof when suddenly the sheriff bolts, letting go of Juggler in the process, and shouts to someone out of sight to light the place up. They leap across to the roof of the restaurant as a torch is thrown to the brewery roof. Elicid and the kid leap across after them, Elicid bowling into the sheriff, who had landed poorly, but the other man attempts to catch the torch instead. He nearly manages, but it slips through his fingers at the last second. The torch hits a pool of gasoline, igniting the vapors coming from it and setting him ablaze. Screaming, he launches himself across the gap to the restaurant, the flames mercifully going out as he lands. Meanwhile, in Elicid's struggle with the sheriff, a shot rings out and he is hit. Screaming in pain, he rolls away, and against the edge of the building, he spots the sheriff making his way down the ladder off the rooftop. Nearby, Kyle struggles with the kid. Elicid watches, thinking they seem equally matched, when suddenly the kid picks up the man and throws him through the skylight of the restaurant, a resounding thud punctuating the sound of falling glass. Looking down through the now broken skylight with the boy, Elicid soon notices that amidst the silent panic of the guests is a man staring up at them. It is none other than Ballard himself, riveting Elicid to his place. He barely manages to tear his gaze from the man, turning quickly away. The ragged man and the boy look at him expectantly as he suggests they get the hell out of there, leaving the rooftop as the wail of sirens pierce the night. He who fights with monsters might take care, lest he thereby become a monster, and if you gaze for long into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, Jenseits von Gut und Böse. The section opens with a large 2-page drawing of a figure lurking outside the open doorway of a large house. A short narrative is featured describing a Kindred as he struggles with the beast, trying to rationalize the things he has done, frantic at the thing he is becoming, and trying to temper his urges with excuses and willpower before giving in once more and feeding. The world Vampire the Masquerade is set in is not our world, but a gothic punk version of it. Society is more corrupt, and evil and chaos more prominent. Though it may appear the same at the surface level, it is a world in which vampires are real, and in which they have directed the flow of history in some form since time immemorial. This section focuses on those vampires who also have a wide and varied culture and the society in which they exist. The touch of death. The Gothic part of the equation sees the church hold even more sway than in our world. Vampires have affected the lives of many, even if unseen, and people often turn to the church in times of crisis. Other institutions, especially those controlled by vampires, are even more conservative and resistant to change than in our world. The punk side of things is seen in how people live. Here, the mafia was never reined in, and gangs typically run the streets. The world is more corrupt, decadent, and inhumane, and it takes great strength to survive, and even more to get ahead. Streets of Blood. Vampire existence can often stretch across millennia, with long stretches of no particular events of note, but sudden flare-ups of conflict and turmoil can happen at any time when two of their kind cross paths, and the interaction goes poorly. Normally a balance is struck among kindred in a city, but truces end and warfare can begin anew at the drop of a hat. The jihad never truly ends. There are also some vampires who seek to have no part in the society of their peers, maintaining no connection with others, and by choice or circumstance do not claim even a clan. These vampires are known as caitiff, the clanless. Though they try to avoid others, in times of need a caitiff is an easy scapegoat to root out and thrust into the spotlight for the whims of others. Many vampires seek to maintain some sense of normalcy in their existence, avoiding the truth of their nature when possible. It is believed that much of the human psyche survives the becoming, but that the burdens and drives of vampire nature can quickly erode it, so those who lean into their nature as a vampire may find their sanity erodes all the quicker for it. Even though they try to maintain their apparent humanity, never make the mistake of thinking vampires are humans. Though human-like in appearance and coming from humans, they are alien in nature. Their needs and desires often differ. They are predators first and foremost. Confinement. Vampires are creatures of cities in part by nature, but also by necessity. Food is in abundance, and the ability to hide their nature becomes all the simpler. In addition, the countryside and more rural areas are often the domain of werewolves, and hatred between these creatures runs deep. So though the cities are a boon to the kindred, they can all too often be a prison of sorts as well. Younger vampires sometimes feel the need to roam, though this seems to fade with age, and the elder vampires often find themselves settling into an area. Despite the danger in roaming, the conveniences of modern travel have simplified things somewhat for those who wish to do so. Population. Vampires are an apex predator, and there are limits to how many can safely exist in an area. Exceeding that limit can often come with dire consequences. With no natural predators, it is on them to regulate their own numbers. The elders remember all too well the fires of the Inquisition, and the weight that mortals can bring to bear if vampire numbers are not controlled and their existence kept hidden. In old times, when cities were more spread out and populations much smaller, there was often only a single vampire per region, supporting their solitary nature. As cities and mortal populations have grown, their own numbers have also increased, and it is no longer possible to function this way. As a rule of thumb, there should be no more than one vampire for each 100,000 mortals in an area. This means all but the largest cities may have vampires in numbers as few as 20 to 50, less for some smaller cities. A prince of a given city will often artificially regulate the number of kindred in the city by means of controlling permission of who can sire, among other tactics. The more vampires in a region, the more strained the masquerade is likely to become. Even when permission is given to sire, many do not survive their becoming. The transformation can often drive them mad, forcing their sire to put them down. Social distinction. Social castes exist among the kindred, and the majority of them are determined by age, though not all. At the bottom of the standing is the caitiff. Though most are generally normal vampires just without a clan, they often live apart from kindred society, some by choice, but more often because they have been cast out. In some cases, those that are cast out had been more traditional members of the society, but their humanity has degraded so much that they are unable to exist among other sentient creatures, existing on instinct and drive for survival alone. The next step up are newly embraced vampires who have not yet been released from their sire or introduced to the prince. They are seen and generally treated as if they were children, and bear the name child, plural childer, or fledgling. Once a young vampire has been released and presented to the prince, but has yet to make their mark in kindred society, they are considered a neonate. Generally, a kindred will retain this status for anywhere from 50 to 100 years if they do not find themselves marked as an anarch. Those who choose to rebel against the society that the Camarilla uphold become labeled anarchs. Though they are generally the enemies of the prince and the elders, they have garnered some measure of respect for the power that they have taken for themselves, and the respect they have fostered, mostly from younger kindred. When a kindred has proven themselves useful, but are still too young to be deemed an elder, they are considered ancilla. They are given increased respect and power. Typically they will range between 100 and 200 years of age, though some younger have attained the status, often because a prince or other important kindred is their sire. When a kindred attains an age between 200 and 1,000 years, they are deemed an elder, though these numbers are not concrete. For example, in the New World, elders will often be found at an age on the younger side of this spectrum, but would likely need to be much older and more powerful to be deemed such in Europe. When exceeding 1,000 years, many vampires begin to retreat from the world, becoming bored or melancholy, but seeking to prolong and protect their own life. They fear the young who may seek to end them for their power and become reclusive and paranoid. These are known as the Methuselah. Many of the Nkanu are from this caste. Some remain heavily involved in the jihad, but tend to do so from anonymity. Finally, above the ancient Methuselah, there are the even more ancient Antediluvians. These are the oldest of the vampires, and second in power only to Cain himself. Only the third generation rank among their numbers, and the mere word of one's involvement in kindred affairs is enough to spark enormous conflict amongst their lessers. Should they choose to meddle in affairs, the effects are often world-changing. The Prince. In ancient times, when the third generation ceased to rule the kindred and retreat from the world's view, the kindred came to accept no rulers. Each ruled their own city and often kept to themselves. However, in the modern age, as cities and other population centers grew together and became larger, this is no longer the case, and multiple vampires can exist in the same area. This advancement, coupled with the onset of the Inquisition, meant that leadership became necessary once more. Especially with the onset of the Masqeruade and the revolt of those known as the Sabbat, the elders came to distrust the youngest vampires, naming them anarchs. Fear of revolt remained, and elders began to take power over large urban metropolitan areas. After an incident in London in 1743, the power of what became known as the Prince was formally acknowledged. The prince holds power over a domain and is the one who can make laws for that area and is responsible for keeping order. In a practical sense, they are the one who can gain the most power in an area and hold it, able to keep the anarchs in their place. The term prince is just that. It does not convey a titular holding, nor is it a hereditary position, and many kindred actually object to the use of it for those reasons. It is a throwback to a bygone age when each kindred was a secret ruler over their own city and varied in some regions with titles such as Duke, Baron, or Count. Not all cities have princes, with some being ruled by councils or under the sway of the dreaded Sabbat. In truth, the prince does not so much reign over a city as oversee it. They are the final arbiter of disputes between kindred in a given city and are responsible for ensuring the masquerade is maintained. Often this is seen as synonymous with the persecution of the anarchs. The kindred in a city owe no oath to a prince, and they obey only insofar as their personal cowardice requires. If the rule of a prince is questioned, it is up to them to use the power they hold to maintain control. Some princes do not seem to understand their often precarious situation and the informality of it, and try to rule as kings, holding heavily to protocol and ritual. Over time, some basic tenets have arisen that were ultimately codified by the Camarilla as the traditions. These traditions are the primary rules by which the Camarilla domains are generally governed. Often, many kindred will ignore the prince altogether, much as they tend to ignore other vampires. As long as they do not break the traditions, many princes see fit to leave well enough alone, even when it comes to Caitiff and Autarchus. Those among the Nkanu, on the other hand, often hold some level of disdain for the position, seeing it as an idle pronouncement of power that represents nothing but the arrogance of one they deem too young to have any true power. Selection. Traditionally, the oldest kindred in a domain would become prince, though this is no longer as common as it once had been. Methods vary from city to city, but typically it will be the person who holds the most power in an area through means of gathering support from elders there. These elders are often known as the primogen, the eldest of any given clan that inhabits the area. Their main desire is generally only to see that the masquerade is maintained. Due to this, even if someone chooses to contest the prince for power, the elders in the area will rarely switch sides because conflict can spread into the mortal world and endanger the masquerade. Any opponent who wishes to overthrow a prince find themselves in an uphill battle filled with intrigue, threats, blackmail, and bloodshed. Most elders will support the existing prince purely because they wish to avoid turmoil, as in their long lives their greatest concern is to continue prolonging that life and rarely seek change. The elders will wield their own immense power, influence, and their own followers to maintain the status quo. Through these obstacles, most who dream of challenging the prince find themselves halted before they even have a chance to begin. Politics. The politics surrounding the role of prince can tend to get messy and intricate the more elders there are in an area. Each has a tendency to try and threaten, cajole, or trick the prince into doing the thing that they want, while maintaining an air of indifference to the whole idea. They will never take things as far as overthrowing a prince, but inevitably all vampires are drawn into the great game, and each generation plays it in their own way. Living in a domain under a prince comes with a certain level of security and laws that must be obeyed. Above all, there is the traditions, the oldest laws known to the kindred, and are consistent across nearly every Camarilla domain. It is the prince who enforces these laws, and ignorance is not a defense against breaking them. The anarchs rebel against all such laws, and feel the traditions are proof of the elders growing fearful and paranoid in their old age. The youngest of the kindred do not hold the same fears and superstitions that such ancient creatures do, and the prince fights a never-ending battle to keep the anarchs in line, either through threats or more direct action. Moreover, the anarchs generally do not believe in Gehenna or Cain as the first vampire, viewing these stories much as they do biblical stories like the Garden of Eden. They believe they are fabrications of the elders that function as a tool to scare and keep others in line. As human society changes and advances, and the youngest vampires are created from these humans, many elders believe that the anarchs will become yet more rebellious. A number of leaders in the Camarilla feel that a total ban should be placed on the creation of any more vampires, but such a thing is unfeasible. Most elders believe nature will take its course, and the most rebellious of them will be wiped out by their own ineptitude before they can give kindred society as a whole away. The traditions. As stated previously, the traditions are age-old laws of the kindred, not written down, but committed to memory and passed down from sire to child. Depending on the region of the world one is in, the words themselves may vary, but the intent is always the same. At conclaves, large meetings of kindred, the traditions will be recited, and it has become a tradition in itself for the traditions to be recited this way by a sire just before a fledgling is presented to a prince and released from their sire's care. Many elders maintain that the traditions were originally conceived by Cain himself after the creation of the second generation, and thus his own laws writ large across the millennia. More likely, however, is that they were created by the antediluvians to control their own progeny so as to prevent a repeat of what befell the second generation at their own hands. The first tradition, acceptance. Honor one another's domain. When thou comest to a foreign city, thou shalt present thyself to the one who ruleth there. Without the word of acceptance, thou art nothing. This tradition stems from a time even before the rise of the princes, when a single vampire occupied any given city. Travel is not terribly common among kindred, but should the need arise, the expectation is that one entering a new city presents themselves to the prince or eldest of that city. Some princes take this tradition very seriously and expect a formal introduction with recitation of lineage, while others are happy enough to have contact made with an underling. Over time, this tradition has become a method for a prince to stay in power, for it gives them the right to question any who enter their domain. Anyone who does not follow this tradition is likely to gain a prince's ire, and better hope that they have the power to withstand them. This most often comes in the form of the anarchs, who do not respect the traditions, and the Methuselah, who do not respect the prince, seeing themselves as demigods who need not abase themselves to their lessers. The prince has the right to refuse acceptance should they so choose, but this rarely happens except when the kindred in question has a poor reputation that has preceded them, or one who has gained many enemies. Even in cases where one does not present themselves but is then discovered in the city, they are rarely removed, instead being forcefully presented to the prince, put in their place, and then released into the streets once more. There are also some who choose to never be seen among the kindred, who dwell in the dark places at the edges of society. If they stay that way, they are generally left alone, not worth the effort to drag into the light. These are the Autarkists, those who refuse to be part of kindred society. The second tradition, domain. Thy domain is thy own concern. All others owe thee respect while in it. None may challenge thy word while in thy domain. This tradition has, by and large, fallen to the wayside as the prince of the city tends to claim domain over its entirety. There is a misconception among anarchs that princes dole out turf to the trusted allies, and though it may be true that those trusted by the prince may be tasked with overseeing parts of a city, that domain is still the property of the prince, and very few give domain to others. Despite this, many anarchs have clamored for such territory of their own, claiming hunting rights to particular areas of the city they call their own. Many young kindred have made attempts to revive the tradition of domain, likening it to the gangs or the mafia claiming turf in a city, resulting in conflicts between rival coteries that can flare up and endanger the masquerade. Though they wish to maintain the status quo, many elders are apprehensive about confronting gangs of anarchs. Though they are much more powerful, the risk of being ganged up on and killed does not seem worth the effort. The third tradition, the becoming. Thou shalt only sire another with the permission of thine elder. If thou shalt create another without thine elder's leave, both thou and thy progeny shall be slain. Though this historically referred to one's sire, the interpretation of this tradition has become more loose in modern nights, and the prince of a domain has claimed this right, and most obey more out of fear than respect. The Camarilla fully supports this interpretation, seeing it as a method to control the population of the anarchs. When a neonate is found who has been sired without permission, the outcome can vary as much as the prince himself. Some may have both the offending kindred and their new progeny put to death, others may outcast both, or in some cases only the sire may be punished for the transgression, and the prince may take in the fledgling or put them under the care of another. It is said that in Europe, this tradition is held in even stricter regard, with a prospective sire needing to seek permission from their own sire in addition to the prince, if there is one for the domain they stay in, with no amount of tolerance given to those who do not obey. The fourth tradition, the accounting. Those thou create are thine own children. Until thy progeny shalt be released, thou shalt command them in all things. Their sins are thine to endure. Simply put, the sire is responsible for all that their child does after their embrace. If they cannot handle their new existence, or put the masquerade in danger, it is the sire's job to take care of the mess, up to and including ending them. While still under a sire's wing, a child has no rights in kindred society, and the sire is held responsible for all actions they commit. Originally, releasing a child involved introducing them to the sire's own sire, but this tradition has also been relegated to the prince in modern nights. Once the child is released, they are considered a full member of the blood and have the same rights as other young vampires in the domain if the prince accepts them. This release is a rite of passage for the young, showing that they can be accepted as full members of the community, child no more. The fifth tradition, secrecy. Thou shalt not reveal thy true nature to those not of the blood. doing such shalt renounce thy claims of blood. This is the Masqeruade, to keep the nature and existence of vampires hidden from the eyes of mortals. In ancient times, full of superstition, this tradition was less revered, but since the time of the Inquisition, it has become paramount. The breaking of this tradition risks putting all of Kindred society at risk, and as such, violation of it is one of the gravest offenses a vampire can commit. The sixth tradition, destruction. Thou art forbidden to destroy another of thy kind. The right of destruction belongeth only to thine elder. Only the eldest among thee shalt call the blood hunt. This tradition has seen repeated reinterpretation throughout time and implies that only the sire has the right to destroy their progeny. However, with the shift of the meaning of elder in context to other traditions, this one too has resulted in most princes claiming it as their right. Much like in other cases, the Camarilla supports the princes in their interpretation, and it is the source of much controversy between older and younger vampires. Most princes enforce their right to this tradition in the strictest sense. If any is caught committing another vampire to final death, no punishment is too severe, often resulting in the violator's own destruction. An investigation will often be conducted, and the higher the status of the one destroyed, the harder the hunt for the murderer. This tradition is most often enforced by the prince calling a blood hunt, which allows for any in the domain to hunt and destroy the accused. Blood hunt. Also known as lex talionis, the blood hunt is a method of punishment in which a kindred is hunted down and destroyed by all in the domain due to transgressions against the traditions and kindred society. In modern knights, it is the prince who holds the right to call a blood hunt, and a breach of one of the traditions is generally the only thing severe enough to bring this about. Calling one for anything else risks the prince losing the trust of the elders and losing support of those below them. It is not wise to demand the end of an immortal life on a whim, and a prince who would do so only to progress their own cause will quickly lose status in their domain. Assisting the target of a blood hunt is a serious insult to the prince, and even choosing to not participate could be seen as a slight against them. The blood hunt is not a formal gathering, nor is it organized. Vampires spread out across the city and scour it corner to corner seeking their target, calling in others should they track them down. Attempts to maintain secrecy and hide from the mortals continues, though an event of this magnitude will at least garner some notice from the living. Often it will at least be noted as a particularly strange night full of odd happenings. The hunted is, for all intents, excommunicated from kindred society, and if caught, at best, they will be maimed and released outside the perimeter of the city, never to be allowed to return. It is far more common, however, that the prince bestows the right to mete out summary judgment on the offender, and may also allow the taking of their blood, making younger kindred avid participants of most blood hunts as they seek to gain more power. Blood hunts are not called lightly, and in modern knights it is far more likely a tribunal will be held with evidence presented for transgressions, and the accused will be offered a chance to defend themselves, allowing a situation to be diffused without such acts. Because if a blood hunt is called, it cannot be stopped. Should a target of a hunt flee the city, they may find refuge elsewhere, and often a prince may offer this as an option in lieu of a blood hunt. However, if a hunt is called and they manage to escape, it is best that they never return. Once a blood hunt is called, it is permanent in that city, even should power change hands. Word rarely travels outside a city, so the outcast may find a place in another domain. On rare occasions, however, a crime is so heinous that the prince will send emissaries to other cities to report the crimes that have taken place, resulting in the blood hunt being called in other cities as well. The most famous example of this occurred in Whitechapel, England in the late 19th century, which resulted in a hunt being called against the offender in nearly the entirety of Europe and most of North America as well, though the culprit was never caught. Sects. As lineage has become less important in modern knights, the concept of sects have risen in prominence. More than half the vampires in the world belong to a sect, while the rest maintain their independence and seclusion. The most prominent of the sects is the Camarilla, though they are contested by the smaller Sabbat at almost every turn. Meanwhile, the Incarnu do not consider themselves a sect, but are united in their desire to stay clear of either of the other groups. Camarilla. The Camarilla are a large sect of vampires, and any vampire may claim membership regardless of lineage or association. In fact, they assume that all vampires are part of their group. The Camarilla's primary concern is with the preservation and maintenance of the Masqeruade. The group was established in the 1400s in response to the widespread danger posed to vampires by the Inquisition. Despite its size and attempt at influence over kindred society, moves made to exert more extreme control have ended poorly. Elders do not take kindly to a powerful group that could thwart their machinations, and even the princes see such moves as infringing on their rights despite being part of the sect. This leaves the sect relatively weak and divided, all things considered. It is said that the Ventrue were the power behind bringing the clans together to form the Camarilla, acting as the driving force for the improbable event. However, many believe they did so as a means to control the other clans. The 7 clans that make up the Camarilla all took part in the original meeting. The other clans were all invited, but none ever showed up. Despite the other clans not being a part of the Camarilla, there are individual members of those clans who may be part of the sect. The official stance of the Camarilla is that the Antediluvians do not exist. Discussions at conclaves have taken place pertaining to them, but no decision has ever been agreed on, and thus their existence continues to be disavowed. Conclave. A conclave is a large meeting held by the Camarilla open to any and all kindred that can last anywhere from a couple hours to multiple weeks. Conclaves are only called when absolutely needed, and can only be called by a Justicar. Security and secrecy of the conclave site is taken very seriously, as such an event provides an opportunity for an enemy of the Camarilla to wreak mass destruction on the sect, and attendees are sealed away into the location by retainers of the Justicars. Any attendee of the conclave may speak if supported by at least 2 other members of the assembly, and a Justicar serves as chairman of the meeting. Matters brought up before the conclave are discussed, are ruled on, and it provides an opportunity for kindred to air grievances against one another or princes in their domain, or for princes to gain support to deal harshly with anarchs in their city. If an action that someone wishes to take could breach one of the traditions, it is best to bring it before the conclave to avoid further punishment. The traditions are interpreted during such meetings, and on very rare occasions, new ones may be introduced. A conclave may also call blood hunts, and is one of the only ways one may be called against a prince. Some conclaves have convened for the sole purpose of removing a prince from power, and the Camarilla has always maintained the position that it has the right to do so. The Justicars themselves do not have the power to do this, but will call a conclave to achieve that end if needed. Decisions made by the conclave may only be contested by the target of a ruling undertaking an ordeal. This can be a trial, mission, or quest to test the accused, and can be a brief task or something that may take many years to complete. If not completed satisfactorily, the Justicar has the right to punish them by any means they see fit. For vampires that are considered too much of a risk to let free to undertake an ordeal, they may instead face one of their accusers in a ritual challenge that can be anything from armed combat to a race in feeding off of one another, the winner being the one that is not destroyed in the process. Of the many punishments that the Camarilla can dole out during a conclave, the most prominent is that of the blood chalice. All members of the gathered assembly put an equal portion of their blood into a cup, and the offending kindred must drink, establishing the first part of a blood bond on them by all kindred gathered. Repeated offenders are rare. Though a conclave can be called at any time by a Justicar, they also hold a regularly scheduled one open to all in New Orleans every 3 years, hosted by Xavier, a Justicar of Clan Gangrel. Inner Circle. The elders of each clan of the Camarilla hold a meeting every 13 years in Venice, and this is the true center of power behind the Camarilla. Each bloodline is allowed to have 1 member who can vote on matters, though any who attend may speak. This representative is the oldest of the clan, and as it is a majority of age, the anarchs are particularly frustrated with his existence. The primary function of the Inner Circle is to appoint Justicars, who act as judges for the sect. Each of the 7 clans has 1 Justicar, and they are the true power of the Camarilla, able to mete out summary justice on all who transgress the traditions. They act on their own accord, only required to take suggestions of the Inner Circle into consideration. The selection of a Justicar is a long, drawn-out political battle, as each bloodline fights over the necessary votes to see their favored choice selected. Losers of this intrigue can end up with a Justicar of particularly young age or weak lineage and are summarily ignored for the next 13 years. Often Justicars will end up being from unknown lines or of higher generation in an attempt to place those who may be easily manipulated. Justicar. Justicars hold a unique position in the Camarilla, bearing adjudication powers over all members of the Camarilla except the Inner Circle, when it comes to matters involving violations of the traditions. Tradition acts to limit the powers of a conclave to pass judgment on any member of the Camarilla, and the Justicars fulfill this role in its stead. No member of the Camarilla is considered above them for this purpose, not even princes. There are no guidelines to determine the kind of punishment they can dole out, and it is left to their discretion. Originally, Justicars were meant to convene a conclave each time they wished to pass judgment on someone, but over the years this occurs less and less often as they slowly assume more power and no longer feel the need to do so. The only kindred who can call into question the decision of a Justicar is another Justicar, and a conclave will be called and all the Justicars brought together to make a decision on the matter. Typically, this is decided with a vote, but on occasion, personal challenges may arise. Even elders often fear the Justicars, as they can be of considerable age when there is no squabbling over the choice of Justicar, though they tend to resent the level of authority they wield. Justicars often have coteries of other kindred who do their bidding and enforce the Justicar's will. These kindred are known as Archons, and are typically willingly blood bonded to the Justicar, and regularly the brood of that Justicar. Archons function as the eyes and ears of the Justicar, reporting potential breaches of the traditions to them. The Sabbat. There was what could only be described as a metaphysical stench about him. It was quite odd. I'd sensed him almost as soon as he'd entered the hall. It took me only a few moments to find him, standing off to the side, obscured by a sea of signs and placards. I'd have thought that the motions within and without that place would have concealed him. That effect was certainly what I was counting on. Nonetheless, there he was. I was cautious, and quickly came to believe that I was all but invisible to him, though his body language told me he knew he was being watched. I took him to be old and powerful, but there was something else. It was only later, after consulting some others, that I realized what had occurred. He was of the bloodline Lasombra, one of the Black Hand. I had sensed the devil's touch on him. I have wondered since if he had anything to do with the horrible things that happened out in the streets that night. William Besson, Chicago, 1968. Rumored to have evolved from a medieval death cult, the Sabbat, also known as the Black Hand, are the next largest sect after the Camarilla. They rule through fear, violence, anger, and hatred, and have undisputed control over Detroit, Toronto, Montreal, New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Portland, and are near to claiming control over Boston and Baltimore. They once ruled over Miami as well, but the power balance has changed there in recent years. They roam in tight-knit packs that bear a strong loyalty among its members and often consist of numerous bloodlines, though there are two clans in particular that number heavily among the sect, the Lasombra and the Zamishi. Though membership to the sect can be gained, most members are created, and strict devotion and adherence to the will of one's pack are paramount. The creation rites of another vampire within the Sabbat are designed to destroy any will that the newly made creature may harbor. The person is killed slowly and painfully, and is not given the blood of a single vampire, but a combination of the blood of all present. Once given the blood, they are buried alive and must dig themselves out in order to join their brethren or exist for an eternity in the ground. The act of clawing their way out of the ground is designed to rip the vestiges of their humanity away, opening them up to subjugation and brainwashing by the sect. They are then blood bonded to their pack in a ritual that occurs over 3 nights. The Black Hand view mortals as lesser creatures, beasts to be used and thrown away as needed. They hold a fanatical opposition to life and actively engage in diabolism, seeking power above all things. They are undead, and they revel in their existence as vampires, disdainful of other kindred who seek to cling to their humanity. For the Sabbat, that is the greatest of blasphemies. The Sabbat will send groups into Camarilla-controlled cities to scout out their opposition and hunt for those who have fled from them. Invariably, a Sabbat presence in a Camarilla domain complicates the kindred politics exponentially. It is said that the Sabbat take part in a strange form of diablerie in which the elders of the sect are ritually butchered and consumed by a younger, more aggressive kindred to give them the strength to take their place at the head of the sect. Like many things about the Sabbat, however, this is unconfirmed, and princes the world over would give much to obtain hard evidence about how the sect truly works. In the end, nothing of fact can be said of the Sabbat, and all that the Camarilla thinks they know could be false. The Nkanu. Nkanu is a term to describe those kindred who have distanced themselves from others of their kind, and is more of a classification than a true sect. They are old, powerful, and often have little need for a constant supply of blood or the company of mortals. They often live in the wilds and sleep in the earth during the day. It is unknown how these are able to exist in peace with the shape-changers who rule in such areas. Many are several millennia old, and they will spend months or even years asleep, and have become not quite of this world, growing apart from it in their solitude. They are the most powerful vampires that most kindred will ever encounter. There are some of the Nkanu who still exist within cities, and though they may have some interest in the jihad, the tenets of their group forbid participation in it. Like all kindred, they have an open invitation to attend conclaves, and they will sometimes appear, causing much awe among the younger vampires. Most are of the 4th or 5th generations and have won their place among the kindred by sheer age or strength. They believe removing themselves from the world is the only escape from the jihad, though their distance from the modern world and fear for their existence contributes as well. Despite their stance on the jihad, Some still deign to meddle in the affairs of others, but if found out are punished harshly. Their only law is one of separation from such machinations. It is believed that many among their number have attained Golconda, and that this may be the reason for their distaste with the jihad and their measured approach to problems among the kindred. They allow no kindred to harm one among their number save themselves, regardless of the crime, but they can be difficult to find or contact. They are the most mysterious of the sects, and no one knows of their organization or priorities, if indeed they have any. Antagonists. Though it often seems the greatest enemy of the kindred is others of their own kind, there are many other things in the world that should cause concern to them. As technology has advanced exponentially, the fears and superstitions of the past have fallen away, laying the world bare. Humanity no longer fears the dark, and indeed does not realize that there is any reason for them to do so. Governments. There are many government agencies in the world dedicated to investigation of the paranormal, but typically seem to have their attention focused inward to things like telekinesis, ESP, and the like. In this regard, the Masqeruade has been a success. However, there have been exceptions to this. One such organization exists in Britain, and is believed to have ties dating back hundreds of years to other groups of a similar mystical nature. The eerie accuracy of investigations into kindred-related occurrences by Scotland Yard leads credence to such ideas, and they are believed to have directly brought about the deaths of at least 2 vampires in the last 75 years. Some believe that the group may actually be controlled by a kindred who uses them to remove enemies that cross their path. In the US, interest in kindred activity can be traced to 2 agencies, the FBI and the NSA. The FBI contains a select number of people who suspect the truth, and investigations into paranormal incidents in the 50s and 60s are cited as having possibly turned up kindred-related info. Known as Special Affairs, they were originally formed to combat the impact of suspected communist thought control research, but influence and numbers have dwindled dramatically in recent years. They are able to act only if proof can be provided to the FBI, and anything beyond circumstantial evidence has thus far eluded them. With the NSA, it is believed that they keep files on vampire-related incidents, though they are a subcategory that ties them to mass murders. They are a fact-sorting agency that flags odd occurrences from police and news reports, but have as of yet been able to connect such occurrences into a bigger picture that reveals anything. Investigation only takes place when a number of anomalies are noticed and tied together as being related. Should this ever happen, the resources that could be brought to bear are terrifying, and the camera has bent a lot of focus towards this agency in recent years. It is paramount to avoid engaging in activities that could put the kindred in their sights, and to date nobody has been able to infiltrate the agency using retainers. Finally, the CDC is also noted as a cause for potential concern, as they have hit upon alarming research that indicates the AIDS virus has begun to spread without any apparent contact between those who contract it, and has launched a massive investigation into the cause before the news begins to spread. The Inquisition. The Roman Catholic Church has been aware of the kindred since the times of the original Inquisition initiated in 1229. Though the Inquisition was primarily concerned with stamping out various heresies spreading through Europe, in particular those of the Carthuris heresy in southern France and northern Italy, due to the fact that many kindred were said to support this movement, some of them invariably fell into the hands of the inquisitors. With the approval of torture in 1252, many kindred were given away by those forced to confess their heresies, leading to an increased fervor by the Inquisition to hunt down what appeared to be evil incarnate in the world. Whatever the truth may be, the Church has been aware of kindred existence since this time, and it is believed that there are 2 smaller organizations within the Church who still carry out the Inquisition to this day, though in a different form. Today's Inquisition consists of scholars and researchers of the occult, as well as a large contingent of vampire hunters. Originally initiated by the Pope, they began as a group to research heresies, but quickly evolved into a ruthless group bent on the elimination and torture of undesirables. They were believed to have ceased activity in the 14th century, but many members continued their work from within the ranks of the Church. Known as the Society of Leopold, they are no longer sanctioned by the Catholic Church, but most members hail from it nonetheless. They are a loose confederation of researchers and priests who keep in touch mostly by letter and the occasional conference. Though they claim to only be interested in research, they are very prominent among the ranks of vampire hunters, and know the best ways to immobilize and kill vampires, bearing ancient records on these subjects. Despite such records, they still know very little of the truth about vampires, and may spend endless hours conducting research and speculating over old records. They will venture to hunt on occasion and hold trials before killing their target, vowing to rid the world of the supernatural. The Camarilla has decreed to avoid them when at all possible, believing it is best to give them nothing to conduct research on, than provide a focal point for the world to focus its attention on. It is better for them to be seen as crackpots than martyrs. Among vampires old enough to remember the Inquisition, their reputation holds up and they are much hated. Such ancient creatures do not believe they have changed from their original incarnation and will do everything in their power to taunt, mislead, and embarrass them despite the Camarilla's decrees. The Society of Leopold has gained many tools throughout the years, developing protections and learning to use holy objects that allow them to counter the effects of many mental abilities harnessed by vampires. In addition, they have the ability to call on other groups in their hunt for witches. The most prominent among members of the Society are known as the Dominicans. They can trace their involvement in the group back to the original Inquisition and are feared by many of the Kindred, though their interests and concerns are unclear. There is also a more radical splinter group that is split off from the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, who are in the midst of controversy with the Holy Office. It is believed they had a hand in the destruction of some Kindred in Algeria 5 years ago, believed to have been perpetrated by a former member known as Sullivan Dane. Dane is one of the few documented active witch hunters, and it is thought he may have used the incident in Algeria to prove to some of his brothers that vampires are real and not merely a delusion of his. Those who joined him are at odds with the Church over the matter. Crosses. Those of true faith are capable of warding off a vampire with a cross, or indeed any other holy symbol, as the function is more on the faith of the wielder than the symbol itself. It is even possible that this could occur without a symbol, and simply through the uttering of holy words, though a symbol is typically required. Depending on the strength of the person's faith, a vampire may have difficulty even approaching the individual, or in worse cases, may be caused harm or forced to flee in terror from them. The Arcanum. Formed during the War of Roses that centered around Paris in the late 1800s, the Arcanum's history dates back much farther, and it is believed they learned of the Kindred through involvement in the shadows of that movement. The core of the Arcanum consists of those self-styled as White Monks. Their mission is not to destroy, but study. The Arcanum has 3 known foundation houses located in Boston, Paris, and Vienna. They recruit from the best of intellectual society and are focused more on theory than practice. Devoted to gathering and studying of occult knowledge, the Arcanum look to the past more often than the present for material. And though there are a few who focus on the present, the general belief amongst the group is that the Kindred no longer exist and were a threat of the past if indeed they had been more than folklore. Typically, their interests lie more in the direction of magic, miracles, hauntings, and other phenomena of a less tangible nature. The Kindred bear some concern over the existence of the Arcanum, as methods they use to hide their presence could come across their attention as a more nebulous phenomena that, with a misstep, will potentially lead the group right to their doorstep. A proclamation came down from the Camarilla Inner Circle, backed by a Brujah Justicar named Ryland, that alongside agents of the Church, the Arcanum are not to be interfered with. Should they be encountered, they can be monitored and reported, but never interacted with. Belief is maintained that any direct interaction with them could provide them with the proof they seek. Lupines. Werewolves are the mortal enemies of vampires and live in close-knit clans connected by family ties. Those in the clan are related and their power is inherited from the female line. They despise outsiders and are very insular. Vampires who intrude on their land are hunted down and executed without hesitation. They are ferocious fighters, not easily diverted from a target, and gaining their enmity is extremely dangerous. Only the Gangrel have any contact with them, and they tend to rampage during the night of a full moon, slaying all those in their path, mortal or otherwise. They have incredible speed and power, and are invulnerable to all normal weapons, hurt only by silver and the fangs and claws of other supernatural creatures. If met during the day, a werewolf is not but a mortal man, their power only functioning at night. The Magi. Following the tradition of the ancient Order of Hermes, the Magi are not to be trifled with and wield incredible power. Though not immediate enemies of the Kindred, they will eliminate any who get in their way, the exception to this being those of Clan Tremere, whom they despise and consider traitors. They adhere to a masquerade of their own, which limits contact between the two groups. Forged in Steel. This city is afraid of me. I have seen its true face. The streets are extended gutters, and the gutters are full of blood, and when the drains finally scab over, all the vermin will drown. Rorschach's Journal. The Watchman. In the chapter that focuses on chronicles and how to create one, we find an example chronicle, the first of its kind presented to players of VTM, and the start of a larger story that set the foundation for the World of Darkness, and was the example by which many games were made. Forged in Steel is a short starter chronicle created by Mark Reinhagen for play by Stuart and Steve Wieck and Lisa Stevens. It is set in Gary, Indiana, where the idea for VTM first began to develop, and is titled after the city's motto, Built on Sand, Forged in Steel. It should be noted that though the population of Gary was, and is, predominantly black by a large margin, the characters represented here are decidedly not, creating a strange juxtaposition that has been noted many times throughout the years and left a bad taste for some. Ultimately, a few of the characters would see their race changed in more recent editions, which will be noted when I eventually reach those. In addition, some may find the idea of picking a place that has fallen on hard times in a very real and imminent way and blaming it on vampires is probably not the most tactful of choices. My intent is not to point fingers or claim to know the thoughts or intents of the developers, but it is worth keeping in mind how easy it can be to unintentionally misrepresent a city and its people when using real-world settings for a game, and what being uninformed about a place and its people can look like from the outside, something to keep in mind in many of the books to come. Located on the east side of Chicago, Gary, Indiana once had a booming steel industry, but it fell into decline in hard times in more recent years. In the world of darkness, the city of Gary is not just in decline, it is truly desolate. Industry has fully fled the region. What was once bustling industry and steel mills is now nothing more than a rusting patch of factories, warehouses, and abandoned waste, known as the Wasteland. In Kindred society, Gary has a prince, Modius, but his power is overshadowed by Loden, the Prince of Chicago, making him a prince who is something less than a prince. The two are arch-rivals who were once well-matched, with Modius the power behind the unions, and Loden the power behind many businesses. The desolation of the steel industry in the area was a direct result of Loden's interference, wanting to demolish the power base of his rival. In an effort to win back some of his power, Modius convinced the Toreador Justicar to call a conclave to be held in Gary. It went abysmally, and was reconvened in Chicago the following night. This was 23 years ago, and though Loden was unable to depose Modius, the Gary prince was forced to agree to confer with Loden on all major decisions. Over the past 15 years, Loden has banned the embrace of new vampires in an attempt to gain control over the Anarchs, but this has merely resulted in new embraces being brought to Gary to be released, and Modius is more than happy to accept newcomers. The intrigues of Chicago are constantly in motion, and what happens there affects Gary. In addition, rumors abound of an ancient vampire in the city. Aside from the Wasteland, Gary is known among the Kindred as being home to a shipping company that doubles as a smuggling operation for drugs and guns, who will happily smuggle vampires as well, able to get you from the area to another country without fear of seeing the sun. In addition, it is home to a secret auction held once a week by a ghoul named William, facilitated by human trafficking. Men, women, and children are sold to the highest bidder, in either cash or blood, and many Kindred from Chicago frequent these auctions to acquire vessels that suit their particular tastes. The Kindred of Gary will often visit Chicago to find some enjoyment, but are generally harassed and treated poorly by those who dwell in the larger city. The vampires of Gary reflect their surroundings, and most are at the end of their rope and have lost any hope of improving their station. Cast of characters. Modius. A 7th-generation Toreador who claims to have been part of the mystic subculture present in post-Renaissance Europe, and was present for the forming of the Arcanum, though the truth of these claims is unverified. Modius is a study in conflict of personality, desiring power above most things, but fearing any chance he might lose it, making him both aggressive, yet also cowardly. Despite his status as Prince of Gary, he likely would be happier if he were not in the position. Though he is a Toreador and lives in a mansion full of fine paintings, he has lost all appreciation for art, and indeed even beauty in general. Despite this, he still feigns an interest in artistic endeavors. Modius has an eerie habit of appearing out of nowhere without warning, and is difficult if not impossible to track. Rumors have spread that he bears some ties to the Tremere, but what that connection might be is not known. He keeps 2 servants at his mansion whom he has dominated so ruthlessly and frequently that they are barely capable of acting on their own any longer. Modius attempts to rule Gary with a strong hand, but is ultimately able to do little more than cajole or threaten in his current state. Despite this, his show of power has been enough to keep most of the Kindred in his city in line, with only Juggler learning the truth of his feeble hold on things. Alicia. An 8th-generation Toreador who claims to remember nothing of her life before her becoming in Gary in the late 1930s. Embraced by Modius, she spent the early years of her unlife attaching herself to wealthy industrialists and acting as their mistress, which lasted until they abandoned the city. Though she is capable of speech, she has not spoken in the last 50 years, feeling no desire to do so. She is commonly seen on the east side of Chicago and has some connection still with a few of the notable families in the city, but realizes more and more that her unaging nature will require that she cut ties with the mortal world sooner rather than later. As the need to stay away from them increases, she spends more and more time at the mansion of her sire, Modius. Being bloodbound to him means that she does not take note of the weaknesses that have become even more present in him, and works tirelessly to ensure that the other kindred of Gary stay loyal to him. Through Modius's machinations, this often includes blood bonding the newer kindred that arrive in the domain to her, giving Modius direct control over the newcomers through Alicia's bond. As she is already bound, she cannot become bound to them. Alicia is ignorant of much of the history and lore of the kindred, and does not realize what is happening to her or what she is doing to others, desperate only for love and the beauty she feels has fled her existence. Juggler. Juggler is an 8th generation Brujah of Italian origin who is widely disliked in Gary, but is tolerated due to some unspoken connection with Modius. It is believed Modius may owe him a debt of some sort that has not yet been repaid, though neither will speak of the matter. He often spends his nights haunting the Lincoln Park area of Chicago, throwing his lot in with late-night revelers and using his presence to become the center of attention before clouding their memory and disappearing into the night before sunrise. Despite this practice, urban legends of the Party Man has spread that can be tied to him. In addition, he has little respect for the lives of the mortals he draws to him, readily maiming and leaving them for dead if they interfere with or hinder him in some way. He maintains a secret identity as the leader of the anarchs within Chicago, and is able to get away with more in the city due to his roots in Gary. The primary HQ of the group is in fact located in Gary, within an abandoned steel mill amid the wasteland. He has contacts with gang members who also inhabit the wasteland, and has begun to subjugate their leaders. Michael. An 8th generation Malkavian of unknown origins, Michael appears to be in his late teens, and as a mortal was mentally disabled. It is believed he was embraced as part of some cruel joke and then abandoned, but has somehow managed to avoid attracting any undue attention to himself and is indeed surviving with little trouble. Michael resides in Telton Cemetery in Gary, sleeping in the mausoleum that bears the name Martin Greenman, whom he refers to as Daddy, though there are no records that this person had a family member named Michael. He is very shy, and will stay hidden from any that enter the cemetery unless he knows them or they have spent multiple nights trying to seek him out. Sometimes he will attach himself to Alicia and spend a few months with her before inevitably wandering back to the graveyard. Despite this, he will often appear at her side if she is under emotional distress, as she has blood bonded him over time. Though incredibly strong, Michael does not kill and will only disable if he must attack another. In addition, nobody in Gary or even Chicago has seen him hunt, and he responds only with a shrug when asked about feeding. Due to his solitary nature and strange demeanor, some may mistake him as a member of the Sabbat. Evelyn Stevens. A 9th generation Brujah born in Chicago, Evelyn was embraced by Juggler after they met on Christmas Eve in the early 80s. She instinctively knew something was different about him, and pressed him until he revealed his nature to her, sealing her own fate. Her transformation ended up being more traumatic than expected, however, and she managed to flee from Juggler and found her brother Gregory, revealing her nature to him before Juggler could track her down. Evelyn rarely thinks her actions through, and the power she now wields often results in her throwing caution to the wind, believing that restraint is not the best course of action for a kindred. Though he often finds them amusing, Juggler is beginning to lose patience with her antics. He did not get permission from Modius before embracing her, and indeed Modius does not yet know of her existence. When he learns, his fury will know no bounds. It should be noted that in the book, Evelyn's brother is noted as being named William, but as will be seen shortly, this was meant to be Gregory based on the upcoming character bios. Alexander Danov. A 7th generation Nosferatu, Alexander does not speak of his past often, but based on conversations relating to his youth around the time of the Battle of Tannenberg in 1410, it can be surmised that he was embraced in the early 1400s. He does not know his sire, so even his generation is not certain, though nothing has been shown to dispute this claim. Even his name is not truly known, and is one that he began to use during his time in Russia in the 19th century. Alexander is very well known among the kindred of North America, as he has been slowly traveling from city to city in search of Golconda. He is not prone to preaching about his aims, but will discuss them if prompted, and if he considers the asker mature enough to approach the task, may even offer guidance and directions on how to reach one of the Incarnu to learn more about performing the dream dance known as Suspire, a final step that must be performed on the path to attaining Golconda. Lucian. Lucian is an ancient 8th generation gangrel who hails from the Roman Empire and served under Julius Caesar. He claims to have slain his own sire, and though his presence commands respect, he is often derided for being a kindred slayer and has made more than a few enemies in Chicago and greatly dislikes Loden, the prince of that city. He is scornful of the idea of clan and sect and bears a hatred for other elders, perhaps due in part to his higher generation compared to others of his age, leaving his blood as diluted as many more recently embraced vampires. Despite his advanced age and resulting decayed humanity, he seems to value compassion and mercy above all else, and will often only interject himself into kindred affairs as an opposition to cruelty and inhumanity, displaying an impressive ability to wipe the minds of others, leaving them a shell of themselves with the mind of a child. Lucian owns the Gary Export Company and indeed controls the entirety of Gary's shipyards and docks, which serves as a travel point for kindred to and from Chicago and Europe, putting him in prime position to know who comes and goes from the city. Though they are not friends, the Prince of Gary trusts him. Sullivan Dane. A former Jesuit turned witch hunter, Dane believed that he had a higher calling from God from an early age. He viewed evil as a real, intangible thing that must be confronted. During his training to become a brother of the Jesuit order in the early 1980s, it is believed he interrupted the hunting of a vampire, who then chose to play with the novitiate before feeding on him. However, he turned out to be too cunning for her and escaped her clutches. Following these events, he spent weeks tracking her down and ultimately managed to capture her. During the captivity, he learned of her fear of fire and used it against her, destroying her utterly, but was scarred by the flames in the process. Unable to convince his fellows of the truth of his experience, Dane left the order a year later. If one such creature could exist, then there must be others, and he set out to perform the Lord's will himself. Though the church did not support him, the Inquisition had heard of his encounter and took him in, providing him with support, information, and contacts in various cities. Dane is driven in his task and has learned much of the kindred and their ways in his time since his first encounter. He is believed to be responsible for the deaths of at least 6 other kindred. He continues to try and convince the church of their existence, but is careful to keep such matters from other mortals, fearful of what it could mean should their existence become common knowledge. He hunts quietly and carefully, his prey often unaware of his presence until it's too late, typically driving those he hunts into an ambush set up by others. 5 years ago, Dane hunted a kindred father and son in Algeria, and it is believed a member of the Jesuit order was with him and that evidence of the encounter was gathered during the event. If rumors are to be believed, the evidence acquired was strong, including video and photographs, and that the Holy Office in Rome is now embroiled in an internal controversy over kindred existence. Despite his proficiency in hunting kindred, Dane is not a wealthy man and lacks strong monetary resources, but prefers the tools of the 20th century to aid in his hunt. His travels have most recently brought him to Gary, where he has set up a base, and it is believed he may have contacted Inquisition members in Chicago and has some resources available to him. Special Agent William Shepard. William Shepard is an FBI agent based out of Chicago, and he knows vampires exist. He's not sure how he knows, but he does. He knows they are evil, and Chicago is full of them, but can't seem to convince anyone else of this truth. His status as an FBI agent means that he can only become involved in cases that are part of federal jurisdiction, and he eagerly awaits the day when a kindred steps over that line. He can often be found hovering around local crime scenes, attempting to involve himself. He'd be a perfect addition to Special Affairs, if only he knew it even existed. Detective Gregory Stevens. Brother of Evelyn Stevens, Gregory is a detective in Chicago who is intimately aware of kindred existence. When Evelyn fled to him after her embrace, he learned of her condition. Though he fears his sister and those like her, he still loves her dearly. Despite his fear, he also sees a certain allure to her condition. Over the last few years, the detective has committed a large amount of time to finding a cure for his sister's condition, making contacts with various organizations, and has even followed his sister to learn more about her and others like her, coming to know more about the kindred than any other mortal in the area. He is ready to kill to protect his sister or rescue her from the fate that has claimed her. Out of the concern he holds for his sister, Gregory has occasionally helped kindred in the city, though he has worked against them as well when his conscience demands it. He hates Juggler in particular, and has often gotten into arguments with him. Though the knowledge he holds would normally put a target on his back, he is kept alive by an edict from Prince Loden to not harm members of Chicago's law enforcement. However, this has not stopped Juggler from severely injuring him on at least one occasion. Should he ever be killed, he has stipulations in his will ensuring that information he holds ends up in the hands of a police academy friend of his, who is now a police commissioner. Baptism by Fire. The chapter following the introduction of Chronicles and the setting for the Forged in Steel Chronicle details the specifics of storytelling and includes an introductory playable chapter that opens that chronicle titled Baptism by Fire. There are a number of continuity errors throughout this chapter when compared with the previous one where relating to this chronicle and story. Character names and or clans are mixed up regularly, for example. I have corrected these where they have appeared to maintain cohesion. Due to the fact that this is a story meant to be played at the table, it does not progress like a normal narrative. I have attempted to portray this information in as pure a form as possible, excising the influence a coterie of players could have on the events, and describing things without such characters present. The stage of the very first VTM story is set in Gary, at a New Year's party thrown by Modius, Prince of the City. In years past, Modius would host a New Year's Eve party every year for which all kindred inhabitants of the city were expected to attend and enjoy conversation and the hospitality of their host. He has not done this in some time, but this year he has decided to do so. All those who dwell in Gary will ultimately be in attendance, but some choose to show up late. Though once a fine mansion belonging to a steel baron, Modius's home is located near the center of Gary and has become run down over the years. Many other mansions in the neighborhood have been divided up and turned into apartments, and this is one of the few remaining that has been left whole. Despite being a toreador, his paranoia keeps him from having the place fixed up, fearing that such work being done would draw too much attention. Indeed, his paranoia keeps him from even sleeping in the house's basement on a regular basis, and he retains a second haven near the lakeshore. As the guests arrive at the party, they are let in by a pair of armed guards in blue-collar workers' clothes, men from the union that Modius controls. Upon entering, Modius greets them personally, dressed in a formal but old-fashioned tuxedo, complete with tails. Danov gravitates to the parlor and stands in the middle of the dance floor merely observing the night's events. He has traveled much and arrived in Chicago recently, and Modius has given him permission to reside in Gary. As a Nosferatu, he can be unnerving, but he has an air of gentle wisdom, seeming to understand all that occurs around him. He speaks freely with those who wish to speak with him, but will not start a conversation himself. Michael hides in a corner of the dining room, as deep in the shadows as he can be. He fears he is being followed, and though, as he is Malkavian, some may write this off as paranoia, his fears are somewhat justified. Sullivan Dane is watching the house, and has been keeping tabs on Modius. Modius's own paranoia would come to the fore were he to realize this. Lucian takes up a seat in the parlor in front of the unlit fireplace, deigning to ignore the other guests. He believes Danov to be a traitor and spy of the Kindred in Chicago, but dares not speak his mind for fear of bringing the wrath of Lodin, Prince of Chicago, down on his head. He anticipates Juggler's arrival, however. Modius prefers to know of at least one haven held by each of the Kindred in his city. His excuse is so that he can contact everyone should an emergency arise, but in truth, it helps him maintain control over the others and also satisfies his paranoia. He is friendly and polite, generally when speaking to others, but if anything sets off his paranoia and distrust, he will quickly fly into a rage and sling accusations against the offending party. Most others at the party will stand by idly and allow this to happen, but should anyone threaten Modius, they will quickly band together behind their prince. This is less out of loyalty than it is due to the fact that he generally leaves them to their own devices most of the year. Near midnight, Modius gathers everyone for a toast and reveals that he has gathered enough power to secure the reopening of one of the city's steel mills, speculating that soon a spark of growth will begin in the city, returning some of its glory. He notes Juggler's absence as midnight approaches, enraging the prince. Sometime later, Juggler bursts in suddenly with a group of drunk mortals in tow. He changes the classical music Modius had been playing to hard rock music. Modius, who had been in the middle of a passionate rant about modern art, is stunned to silence momentarily. As soon as he regains himself, he begins to lash out at the intrusion, demanding that all the mortals be killed, insisting the masquerade has been breached. It should be noted that he never once turns his ire on Juggler himself, and is only fearful of the mortals remembering where he lives, his paranoia coming to the fore yet again. Juggler cares not what happens to the mortals, and will not help or hinder regardless of what Modius ultimately does, finding the whole thing amusing. Evelyn, who came mixed in with the mortals as Modius still does not know of her embrace, is the only one who would step in to defend should things go south. Juggler proceeds to treat Modius with derision and open contempt, mocking and insulting him. The prince does nothing. Later, after things have died down some, Juggler stops his music and decides to present Evelyn to the prince, announcing her as his child. Modius does not take this revelation well, ranting and threatening for several minutes before doing nothing. He eventually regains his composure, simply saying he trusts she has been properly taught of the traditions, before ultimately resuming his diatribe about modern art. Evelyn proceeds to introduce herself to the others present. Late in the party, an unexpected guest arrives, bearing a letter from the Prince of Chicago, Annabelle, an elder of Clan Toreador and an old friend of Modius. The prince is taken aback at her arrival, and a flash of fear can be caught in his eyes as her arrival is announced. Upon hearing the news, Juggler and Evelyn quickly make their exit, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible and exiting out the back in direct contrast to the boisterousness of their arrival. Annabelle greets Modius and escorts him to his office, from which muffled shouts and exclamations can soon be heard. Modius even storms out of the office at one point, clutching a letter and deriding Loden and making demands of him, mentioning the involvement of a Justicar, but is soon ushered back to the office to continue speaking with Annabelle. Sometime later, Annabelle takes her leave, and Modius announces that some of the neonates among the gathered must make a trip to Chicago to present a reply to Loden, noting that he is rejecting this pile of rubbish, these contemptible demands. He notes that he will not tolerate interference in the affairs of his city. The group is directed by Lucian to find a Sir John Henry at the Succubus Club if they have any trouble, and are sent on their way. Characters: Annabelle Triabel. Annabelle is a 6th-generation Toreador and is believed to be the eldest of her clan in Chicago. It is not easy to tell she is of such an age, and keeps a mortal-facing identity as Elizabeth Stanley Greer, married to John Greer, a newspaper publisher since the 70s. In recent years, local media have begun to comment on her apparent agelessness. She leads a decadent life full of excess and hedonism, and regularly ends up at odds with Loden due to her flippant nature that risks a media scandal at any time. She has befriended Modius, the Prince of Gary, and though her true motives are unknown, she seems to enjoy playing the two princes off of each other, increasing or decreasing the friction between them as needed, likely in an attempt to manipulate more power for herself. Afterward. The book notes that this is the end of Baptism by Fire, and though the story can be continued however the players wish, the official continuation occurs in Ashes to Ashes. As a side note, there is also a playable chapter included with the storyteller screen that can work as an intermediary event between Baptism by Fire and Ashes to Ashes that is called Blood at Dawn. Both of these will be covered in later videos. Epilogue: The Release. The epilogue consists of a transcript held and sealed by the NSA. It depicts one side of a conversation between two kindred. The speaker is older and supposedly dying. He is over 2,000 years old and describes the nature of the kindred as he has come to know it to the individual he speaks to before they are interrupted by a sound, presumably the source of the transcript. An unnamed ancient vampire speaks to another, explaining to him the nature of their kind, to be told the secrets of the undying race, the flesh-eaters. He explains that they are cursed and condemned, and to remember that above all things because nothing can or will ever change that fact. The kindred are monsters, and none have ever been able to truly control their beast. He says not to pity oneself for this fact, as such petty sentiments are beyond them. The vampire, he says, is the pinnacle of the food chain, apex predators and hunters of other hunters. There is no more advanced creature on this earth, an efficient predator at the peak of performance. They are marked by the crossed swords of ecstasy and despair, wondrous beasts torn by these two extremes. He speaks of Cain as the first of their kind, passing his blood down through the generations. If this is true, and the kindred originate from the third human to ever walk the earth, then he notes that those of the 12th generation or less are, in fact, closer to God than any mortal that walks the earth, and ponders the disquieting nature of this fact. Despite this, kindred tend to view themselves closer to hell than heaven, doomed to walk the earth for eternity until fate or circumstances ends them, much as Cain was cursed by God to wander as punishment for the slaying of his brother. Similarly, mankind is said to be doomed as well, via Adam's eating from the fruit of the tree of life. In this way, both kindred and kind are imperfect. Much like mankind, the kindred who seeks redemption must work to better the lives of those around them. The goal is not to achieve perfection, but to reach a state of greater perfection than one's beginnings allowed, regardless of a belief in an ultimate reward to come after. With this he stops, assuring his visitor that he did not bring the other here to talk philosophy or theology. He notes the amusement of the other, who believes evil to be an antiquated concept, but he assures his visitor that evil is all too real, but must be met to know its name. He notes that an individual is not evil, however, and that it is the actions of the individuals that are. Vampires are not pure evil, lacking any humanity. No creature exists in such black and white contrasts. Despite this, many vampires do indeed view themselves as evil. God intended Cain's sin to curse the world in much the same way as Adam's own, and the transference of Cain's curse to others is proof of this. As agents of that curse, they exist to torment mankind, a very real, very active evil in the world. How can they not be, when they are so clearly damned? Others, however, take a viewpoint more in line with the duality of existence. For how can true damnation exist if there is not a chance of salvation to balance it? Without the ability to reach for salvation, damnation has no true value. Without hope, there can be no despair, and so on. A vampire may be damned from creation, but this means only that the road to salvation is inherently longer and more treacherous, and reaching the end all the more grand. This, the Old One notes, is the path he chose so long ago, Golconda. Some believe it to be a place, others a state of being, but it is the point to which all of Cain's descendants should aspire, the point of true redemption and absolute understanding for the kindred. Forgiveness even for Cain. For if Cain were to be forgiven, it would extend to all of his line. He quotes a passage from the Book of Nod to support this idea. To rise from the darkness, to soar from the heights, to reveal the light inside, to forgive our sire his sin, and thereby redeem our souls. That is our struggle. That is our test. We are the blessed. We are the damned. We are his children. Even those who do not seek to forgive Cain would benefit, and therein lies the rub. Not all want to be forgiven, and see their role as evil manifest to be a divine writ. There is no forgiveness, no redemption. There is no ladder to climb, only the walls of the pit they wallow in. Even this ideal does not make them evil, though, only ignorant. Both sides struggle against one another, but it is not a binary conflict. There are fanatics and conservatives on both, and other viewpoints in between. This is the essence of the eternal struggle between kindred, what has come to be known as the jihad. A simple way to gauge the inherent power of a vampire is in their generation. Cain's blood dilutes as it passes on, so those closest to him have the greatest ability. In this way, the youngest of the kindred are nothing compared to the eldest of their ancestors. Though still powerful in their own right, these younger vampires are victims of the rapid changes present in society over the last couple hundred years. Nearly all aspects of human life and society have changed in vast leaps over the past couple centuries, often leaving previous changes behind in an ever-moving cascade of innovation and learning. Mankind has cast light on the shadows that make up the mysteries of life and the world. At the same time, this has deepened the mystery of the kindred even further. The science that has revealed the nuclear heart of an atom, or mapped the DNA of creatures great and small, fails to rationally explain the existence of the immortal vampire. Where, then, does this leave the modern kindred? To have been raised in a world that values the light of reason and fact over the shroud of emotion and mystery, how does one cope with being thrust back into the shadows? What future do they have? Returning to the subject of the jihad, the man describes it simply as a fight for dominance, an eternal struggle that has developed into something of a ritual over the ages. Those of the third generation are in hiding now, pulling strings from the shadows. Once they nearly ruled the world with their incomprehensible power, but it is said that Cain moved against them before it could go that far. Cain, and through him the rest of the kindred, are damned by God, and gaining such control over the world would be an insult to God's desire. This action resulted in the death of many of them. Those who remain receded from mortal society, and now manipulate from the shadows, with much of kindred history since that time being aimed at preventing such a thing from occurring again. The jihad's origins can be found just after these events. Those in hiding warred against one another, with the world of men, its civilizations, and even the forces of nature, their tools to fight amongst themselves in secret and with subtlety, fearful of awakening Cain's ire once more. The man then notes the etymology of the word jihad, noting that though many interpret it in this day and age to mean holy war, this is not its true meaning. Its true meaning is to pursue the cause of Islam to the utmost effort, something that may include warfare, but does not require it. He believes that the eldest progeny of Cain used the word in this intended sense, that it is action taken with the utmost effort, and not in the context of war. Each focusing all of their effort in the search for Golconda, while stymieing those among their number that seek to damn the world. When these actions become too intense is when Cain steps in to end things. Some also believe that Cain is tormented by the fact that he has sired at all, believing that God finds this too to be an affront that has led to further denial of salvation for him. The man, and, he claims, many others believe that Cain does indeed still exist, and are fearful that he will one day crawl out of the hole he's hiding in and see what the kindred have done to the world, and bring his wrath down upon all of them. He says the younger kindred do not understand this, or do not believe. They know not of the jihad, Golconda, or the struggle, and are blind to most things beyond the world in front of them. They do not understand because the elders fear to speak of such things. They believe that speaking of Golconda will lessen it. How can one such as they have a tongue pure enough to speak of the holiest of holies? They fear to speak of it, and they fear Cain. Do you see now, he asks, why I risk so much by speaking and you listening? He goes on to talk about the desire as one ages to sleep. is caused by a spiritual exhaustion and the burden of such a long existence. To this end, the first of Cain's children, the second generation, sleep now. The jihad has passed on from them, and it is the third generation who are its masters now. They pull the strings in how to realize their machinations without disturbing Cain or their sire's slumbers. He notes that though all of this may seem archaic, it must be kept in mind that they live so long, there is no proper way to measure their lifespans. They outlive those they have called friends, and witness discoveries in science, theology, and philosophy, only to see those discoveries abandoned and made obsolete by what comes after. To remain sane and civil with their peers, the establishment of structures such as the jihad and the traditions were necessary. He goes on to note that much of the superstitions and stories about vampires arose in the Dark Ages, when the anarchs roamed and fed off the sick and dying while elders hid. More scavengers than hunters, there is a strong possibility the Inquisition arose because of them. With the coming of the modern age, they do not need to resort to such things, able to move about more freely and with more anonymity. In addition, though they have less potential power than those of lower generations, they master the power they do have much quicker. The struggle for survival and the path to power is not so difficult, and so he feels that this is why they scorn things such as the jihad. He goes on to note that much has been said of the Kindred and their ways, but that these are a wholly Western conceit. He notes that there are others, those who dwell in eastern lands such as China, Indonesia, Japan, and others where dwell creatures similar to the Kindred in many ways, but different in others. Some theories suggest they hail from a different sire, someone not Cain, and bear an alternate if similar state of being. Others believe them to be wholly different creatures altogether despite the similarities present. Nobody knows for sure, as any who have gone in search of the answers have never returned. Some elders believe they are ancient players of the jihad, descended from those who escaped Cain's wrath by fleeing to the east and hiding there. Whatever their origin may be, he states, they bear a stronger supernatural nature than the Kindred themselves. Though they exist beyond the mortal plane, the Kindred are wholly physical beings with inherently physical limitations, something those who dwell in the east are less limited by. With this, he says, he has spoken enough. There is more to say, but he has risked much for both of them by saying what he has. I am cursed, and I am damned, though I am now mortal, he reveals. He says he has lived over 2 millennia, but he has only found true peace in the last 12 years or so. He speaks of tasting food, feeling the sun on his face, and experiencing mortal love, saying that all the suffering of the centuries has been worth it for these recent years, if only Yoriador had not seen him that day and her teeth had not touched his neck. It is at this point that the visitor he speaks to seems to become agitated, and a noise is heard from the outside before the recording cuts off abruptly. A notation at the end declares that the recording has been sealed by the order of the NSA, overseen by Special Agent William Shepard. Last words. This final section is a postscript of sorts, and I included it in this video despite it not being intrinsically lore-related, as it is an interesting insight into the creation of the game. It is written by Mark Reinhagen, discussing the year of his life spent writing Vampire, describing it as a period of, quote, naked obsession, and that he is proud of the results. He describes the process of making a game like this as a strange one, the melding of science and art through the lens of entertainment, seeking to describe the world through the game mechanics, while still maintaining qualities of beauty and relevance, and always keeping in mind that both of these things come second to the game actually being fun. Despite this, he hopes that these things together will make Vampire a work of significance and worthy of distinction. Nature Red in Tooth and Claw. Vampire was written in order to help discover the true nature of evil, Mark writes. He notes that he was never particularly interested in the clear-cut dichotomy that the Bible likes to paint of good versus evil, and he believes that evil is an inherently natural force in the world and an intrinsic part of the human condition. He states that the recognition of evil is crucial to the attainment of happiness. Evil manifests itself in pain, beings who attack or attempt to harm you, in the natural cycle of life itself. Nature is immoral and sadistic, a clear representation of evil, though it is also beautiful beyond words, he notes. Mankind was created in an imperfect world, pre-programmed to experience pain and horror. The human psyche bears the mark of evil from the start, and is the sum of fear, lust, violence, and bad memories amidst the width and breadth of human existence. Most human evil comes from distorted representations of natural programming within mankind's subconscious. Unharnessed aggression and an overbearing territorialism led to war. Unchecked herd obedience leads to events like the Inquisition. Every human evil has its roots in some natural function, he states. Our self-awareness and reasoning minds catapult us to something approaching divine in nature, but the biological needs and animal-like trappings of our physical form can often run counter to that. Achieving a measure of goodness often requires rising above our natural state, and it is a precarious path and slippery slope to return to those base animal instincts. Morality requires combating the evil within, the beast within, he writes. This is the evil represented via Freud's id, or Jung's shadow, the source of bad dreams and dysfunction in a highly socialized society that has sealed away many normal outlets for such unacceptable behaviors. Society teaches to bottle and bury those demons, hiding them from the world. As society has progressed, we find ourselves removed further from most of the basic terrors that existence holds, and this leaves us ill-equipped to confront our unconscious horror and inner demons. This leaves us trapped with a beast we do not understand, and that society does not recognize as real, and a world that doesn't believe in the existence of evil. Due to this, we hide from our inner selves, pretending the beast within is not real, and living an organized and sanitized existence that cannot identify with it. But a modern society that has effectively destroyed the beast has destroyed our souls as well. We have been so far removed from this part of ourselves that we are emaciated with its absence. In losing our beast, we have released an even greater monster unto the world, meaninglessness. Instead of expelling our darker side, Mark posits, we must instead learn to harness it. One must come to terms with the evil within. To accept and come to understand it is the only way to truly overcome it. Fortunately, he writes, the stories and legends of our past still exist, even in this sanitized world. Our ancient fears, and all of the fiction based upon them, are a way to reacquaint ourselves with the beast and to learn its name. Your darker side cannot be reasoned with. It does not subscribe to the ordered logic and reason of the world as it is. In order to overcome, you must instead become. It must be found and experienced in order to exercise it, but one cannot truly become evil and remain moral. The fear, rage, and visions of terror that rise from the dark chaos of the mind must be confronted. As in so many stories, the hero that fights ever against the beast and the evil of the world must, ultimately, discover the darkness within themselves to truly conquer their foe. Despite this, we will never truly find an end to the war within ourselves. Each of us forever confronts personal demons in a private hell of our own. That is the reality of the journey we make towards redemption. It is his hope that Vampire will be a game that will assist us in doing just that. It is the power behind the obsession, he concludes. Hiding your sources. Finally, he attributes the successful completion of this game to the many who are credited in its making. Without them, he notes, it would not exist in any form whatsoever. The product you see is an evolution of the ideas passed between them in a chain transformed but never broken, and synthesizing it into being. What we call creativity is actually evolution, he notes. Creativity is hiding your sources. When one is creative enough, however, the sources can be hidden so well that they can be revealed openly because they are no longer recognizable in what was made. That is the real achievement. He urges those who read the book to take the ideas within and use them like seeds to evolve your own stories and become a part of that unbroken chain, tracing back through the ages. With this in mind, he notes sources that inspired himself or those who helped to create Vampire as it is. These include novels: The Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, Dracula by Bram Stoker, Those Who Haunt the Night by Barbara Hambly, Sandman by Neil Gaiman, Time Enough for Love by Robert Heinlein, movies: Near Dark, Vamp, The Hunger, Nosferatu original, Dracula original, Blue Velvet, Rear Window, Lost Boys, Alien, Aliens. Games: Ars Magica, RuneQuest, Shadowrun, Call of Cthulhu, Pendragon, GURPS Horror, Core, Illuminati, Dungeons and Dragons. Other: the works of Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, Milan Kundera, Hermann Hesse, Albert Camus, P.B. Shelley, Mircea Eliade, Ayn Rand, and Václav Havel. Upcoming Vampire products. Much like the preview, the end of the book is host to a list of upcoming titles for Vampire. In this case, the list ends up being a bit more accurate than the original, as they have likely zeroed in on things a little better, and their release schedule and the game's needs are clearer. The list includes Ashes to Ashes, Storyteller's Screen, Chicago by Night, Blood Bond, The Succubus Club, Alien Hunger, The Player's Guide, A World of Darkness, The Hunters Hunted, Storyteller's Handbook, Who's Who Among Vampires. All of these titles would indeed see a release, with only Who's Who Among Vampires landing after the 2nd edition core book. But product numbers would continue to be shifted around, with most of these ending up under different numbers when they finally hit shelves. The message about the future game lines and their compatibility is once again restated. The end. And thus concludes the original Vampire the Masquerade core book. If you made it this far, congratulations, and thank you. I know this was a long one, and it was a lot of info to cover. I hope you learned something of interest, even if only to see the differences that existed originally from whatever your preferred edition may be. Luckily, the next few titles will be much shorter, so the time between videos should shorten substantially for at least a little while, especially the most immediate of them, as they will cover small one-shot style stories which were released alongside or soon after the core book, so keep an eye out for those to follow. Thanks for watching, and until next time, be sure to keep your beast in check.